Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee. First of all, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. So I want to welcome everyone into the meeting who's here tonight, councillors, members, officers, members of the public. Just to remind everyone, this is not a public meeting, it's a meeting which is held in public. So you're welcome to engage and ask the questions which have been submitted, but during and when anyone else is speaking, if you can give them the same respect and keep noise to a minimum, please, that'd be appreciated. Thank you very much. And first of all, ask Rebecca, have we got any apologies?
No apologies, Chair.
Thank you. And no substitute members, then I take it?
Yeah, no substitute members.
Great, thank you. I'll take this moment to welcome a new member to the committee. Councillor Goodall, welcome, thanks for joining us. And wishing well to Councillor Moore, who has gone on to join the Cabinet. So good luck to her in her new role. Item number 3 is declarations of interest. If any councillors have got any disclosable pecuniary interests or any other interests, can you let me know? No? Well, I have, and I thought I'd give you a moment first. On item number 6, which is the plant-based and reduced meat and dairy diets discussion paper, a large part of that paper is made up of the plant-based treaty. And as an individual, as a councillor, I've endorsed the plant-based treaty. And while it's not a pecuniary interest, I think it's fair to say that I'm probably predetermined on that debate. So when that item comes up, I'll hand over to my vice chair, Councillor Dalton Gibson, to look after the chair, and I'll go and sit in the public gallery and not take part in the debate. And that brings us on to item 4, which is minutes of the last meeting. Is everyone happy with approving those minutes? Can I take that as agreed? Excellent, thank you. And then we move on to public issues, which we've got a number of. I think we can start. I'm going to extend this to make sure that we try and fit everything in. So we normally have 15 minutes for this. We've got one answer, which is going to be provided because a lot of the questions are on the same topic. So what I'm going to ask is if each of the questioners can come up as I read your name up, read your question, go back and take your seat, and we'll try and get through them all as quickly as possible. And then I'll hand over to Councillor Hadley to give a response to all of those questions at once. So hopefully that'll give us the time to get through everything. Before we start these issues, can I just read out? You can read out the housekeeping. Sorry, I forgot completely about that. I was doing my own.
That's okay. It's just for the general housekeeping for the meeting. So please note that this meeting is being recorded by the council for live broadcast and will be published on the council's website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, or their ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point in the front of the car park of this building. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on your laptops. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. We have a summer break and I forget how to do my job. Okay, so item number 5, public issues. The first question we've received is from Chris Gilliff. If you can come and take a seat, if you want to press the button on there and your microphone will switch on and ask your question, please.
Thank you. Thank you for discussing the plant-based treaty today. I was at the meeting in July for the council, and I'm grateful that you're looking at this all again. The councils who endorse the plant-based treaty go on to do some really amazing things. I feel particularly inspired by the Exmouth Town Council's plant-based treaty action plan. They are transitioning their climate meetings and public events to be fully plant-based. At recent community festivals, they've asked food vendors to have a minimum of 2 plant-based options to emphasise and promote them at the top of their menu, including carbon labelling. It's really simple, so it works. We could do that here, such as at the street food corner in Bournemouth and the Christmas market in the town centre. And if the BCP council could start that process today and endorse the plant-based treaty, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. The next question is from Alex Harmon. Cheers, would you like to take a seat and ask your question?
Hi, everyone. So at the July Council meeting, I heard all of the positive and urgent reasons the BCP Council should endorse the plant-based treaty. I won't repeat the facts from the last meeting, but I'm sure we can agree that the science is compelling and the benefits of plant-based foods are undeniable. I feel it's particularly urgent for a country like the UK that consumes a lot of meat and dairy to act fast and boldly. At COP28 last December, the UK signed a pledge to include food in climate action planning. So I believe this is the perfect time for BCP to become leaders in the food and climate space. Please can the Council commit today to initiate a thorough impact assessment like Edinburgh Council have done? By joining 30 other towns and cities in the UK and worldwide, we can positively impact the local community, but also influence the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. The next question will be from Noah Baker. Noah?
Hello, everyone. So I've just moved to Bournemouth and I heard about the plant-based treaty in the Daily Echo. I've come along here today to show my support for BCP endorsing it. And I've been reading about the experience of other councils and quite frankly, it's brilliant. Haywards Heath were the first European council to endorse the treaty. One of the councillors, Deanna Nicholson, has been building up a test case at public events where plant-based food has been featured and successful, with the plan of making food offerings fully plant-based in the future. And she said in an interview, not only are we reducing our carbon footprint and meeting the aims of the plant-based treaty when serving vegan food, but all our community is suddenly welcomed and catered for. I realised the best plant-based argument is that of inclusion. So please can the BCP Council join 30 councils who have endorsed the plant-based treaty and then create an action plan similar to that of Edinburgh. Thank you.
Thank you, Noah, and welcome to Bournemouth.
Thank you.
The next question we've got is from Nicola Harris. Nicola, if you'd like to come and take a seat and ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you. I attended the full council meeting in July where I invited BCP Council to consider endorsing the plant-based treaty and commit to expanding access to plant-based food. I appreciate the committee for listening and initiating this important discussion today. Please can you take the next step by committing to an impact assessment on endorsing the plant-based treaty. This process was transformative for Edinburgh City Council, which endorsed the initiative and then committed to a plant-based treaty action plan. They are now close to completing their carbon labelling trial, which they aim to implement in all schools by 2026. This is just one of many plant-based treaty actions that Edinburgh will deploy to help children and their parents understand the link between their food choices and the planet. It will encourage them to make sustainable choices and opt for plant-based options of their own free will.
Thank you, Nicola. The next question will be from Gemma Middleton. Gemma?
Hi, thank you. As a parent of vegan children, it's been a huge struggle to get their school to provide plant-based meal options. All children should have the freedom to choose a plant-based option every day. Plant-based options are for everyone to enjoy, and they also cover a lot of bases when allergies are concerned. I know that BCP can only directly impact a small number of schools and not all the academies, but by expressing support for a plant-based treaty and creating an action plan, it would actually help focus the whole area on sustainable food. You could also invite all the schools to do what Edinburgh did with the carbon labelling. The council has the power of influence and leading by example. Can the council conduct an impact assessment and look at how the council can influence schools through existing connections and partner organisations?
Thank you, Gemma. And the next question will be from Sasha Gilliffe. Welcome, Sasha. Oh, Sasha, can you just press the button again? It's just gone off the microphone.
There you go. That's better. Good evening. I thank the council for looking into the plant-based treaty. It's not just about the environment and health. It's also a social justice issue. We must not allow ourselves to be swayed by false justifications, such as I only buy local and smoked salmon is the only source of omega-3, and talk ourselves out of accountability. Humane slaughter is a contradiction that we shouldn't be deceived by either. We will be making a strong commitment that will focus our minds if we endorse the plant-based treaty. Councillor Jim Dixon, Cabinet Member of Healthier Communities at Lambeth Council, said, "The endorsement makes the direction of travel on food and sustainability clear and identifies it as a priority." Let's do the same for the BCP. Can an impact assessment be conducted to scrutinise the issue fully and roll out an action plan? Wouldn't that be a win-win for environment, our health and the animals? Thank you.
Thank you, Safia. And the final public question this evening is Sarah Abbott. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thanks for having us. As a business owner, I would love to see BCP Council endorse plant-based treaty. Businesses look to the council for direction and guidance, and endorsing this initiative would positively influence the community and bring us new visitors. Can the committee speak to other towns and cities that have endorsed the plant-based treaty in order to learn about their experiences, please? I do urge the council to be bold. I was disappointed, to be honest, with the council response in July when the leader said they couldn't support a standalone initiative. I believe we can. Nothing is actually stopping us. Small changes are not going to be enough given the crisis we face. However, a plant-based treaty endorsement, which means you are expressing support for it, along with an action plan, is going to set us on the right path. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Okay, that's all the questions we've had this evening. So I'm going to hand over to Councillor Hadley, who's got an answer to provide to all of those in one go, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank all the members of the public who presented questions today. And in answering them in one, I did carefully try and consider the points you all raised, but I'm also very conscious that they will be debated tonight. It's because of this level of interest that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee wished to examine this issue further. And my team have been working on a paper to support that, including talking to the other councils who have progressed on this topic. As confirmed at full council, we recognise that change to plant-based or reduced meat and dairy diet is an important component in reducing our personal carbon footprint. The Cabinet felt we could not address and therefore endorsed the plant-based treaty in its entirety. We felt we should promote and encourage rather than mandate to take up of plant-based options. As acknowledged, our direct influence over schools and commercial outlets is limited, whereas government can legislate for mandatory change, our powers are quite limited. Today's meeting enables the Overview and Scrutiny panel members to review the evidence and to debate the form that promotion and encouragement could take. This can then be subject to further consideration by the Cabinet of BCP Council. I hope the paper, the debate tonight, and subsequent work addresses the questions you've all raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Continuing on with the public issues, we have a number of statements tonight as well. Some of the people are here to read them out, and I think a few will be read by Rebecca. So the first one which we've got is from Jacob Baker. Thanks, Jacob. If you'd like to sit down, turn the microphone on and read your statement. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So I've just moved to Bournemouth from the north of Wales, and part of the reason I came here is because of the vibrant community and how vegan friendly it is. I know loads of people visit here too as tourists just because of our vegan friendlies vegan friendly eateries up in the Triangle, for example. Some cities like Tokyo and Japan have even asked businesses to do more vegan food to attract plant-based tourists. And I believe if we endorse the plant-based treaty, I think even more people will come here from all over the world. It seems a perfect fit for Bournemouth, and I'm asking you to endorse the plant-based treaty and then do a world-class action plan.
Thank you, Jacob. Getting everyone moving to Bournemouth today. And the next statement will be read out by Rebecca, and that's from Amber Lofthouse.
Thank you, Chair. I'm writing to express my support for BCP Council to endorse the call for a global plant-based treaty. The initiative is supported by 200,000 individuals, 3,000 groups and businesses and 30 cities, including Edinburgh, Norwich and Amsterdam. When the councils endorse plant-based treaty, it appears to have a mobilising impact, which spurs the council into action. When Amsterdam endorsed it, they agreed to vegan Fridays in public institutions. I hope Bournemouth can be as focused and bold as this. You've taken the first step by putting it on the council agenda for discussion. I urge you to now turn this into a recommendation for the council to approve an endorsement of the initiative.
Thank you. And I believe you're also reading the next, which is a statement from Hannah Ford.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I am writing to you to inform you of my full support of the proposed plant-based treaty in Bournemouth. I have recently moved to the area, and one of the main attractions for me was the wide range of vegan eateries, groups and events. Plant-based diets are known to protect the environment, human health and reduce animal suffering, and the plant-based treaty can enable Bournemouth to take action in all of these areas. The treaty is already endorsed by over 200,000 individuals, 3,000 groups and businesses and 30 cities, showing the high level of interest and support received worldwide. Endorsing the plant-based treaty would display how Bournemouth can be a shining light for other towns and cities to also take the pledge as we move towards a fully plant-based system.
Thanks, Rebecca. The final statement this evening is from PG Holyroyd, but it will be read by Dom DeVita. Thanks, Dom. If you just want to turn the microphone on and read out the statement.
Thank you. A poem by P.G. Holroyd. Endorse the plant-based treaty. Are you doing your best in your personal quest to reduce your carbon emissions? You recycle your waste and ensure that it's placed into bins with correct definitions. You're reducing your flights and you turn off your lights. You cycle to work when you can. What more can you do? You're certain that you are doing enough for one man. But there's something you've missed from your credible list if your diet is milky and meaty. You need to do these: eat plants and plant trees to endorse the plant-based treaty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of item 5. I just want to thank all the members of the public who have come in today and asked questions and made statements. I absolutely love it when people get involved in our meetings, and I've said it before and I'll say it again. I hope that we have the same amount of interest in all the meetings that we have going forward, and all of our residents are more than welcome to attend these meetings, ask questions and make statements. Now we'll move on to item 6, where I'll hand over to Councillor Dutton to chair this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just give you a moment.
Disappear.
Councillor Hadley, I believe you're going to introduce this first.
Thank you, Chair, Deputy Chair. Yes, so really, as I said to the in answer to the questions, we as the climate team have worked on council's behalf, looking at the issue of plant-based treaty. It's an important element of our carbon emissions, and one that we do need to address. And Neil is actually going to talk a little bit to introduce the paper for members, and then we'll do our best to answer any questions that arise. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself and introduce the paper? Thank you.
I will, thank you, Chair. My name's Neil Short. I work in the Council's sustainability team. And the Chair and Vice Chair of the committee requested that I bring together with my team, not just a solo effort, some evidence around the reduction of meat and dairy in our diets, so that the committee could debate the best way forward that they can recommend to Cabinet. So hopefully you have all had chance to look at the paper. It's by no means exhaustive, given the time that we had to put it together, but it sets out, I think, the key issues around this topic. The first being that there's many organisations who agree that we do need to reduce our meat and dairy intake. Those organisations include the United Nations, they include the UK Climate Change Committee, and many, many others. They all have different statistics, if you like, some different targets that they say we should aim for. The UK Climate Change Committee say we should look for a reduction between 20 and 50% of meat and dairy in our diets. So that's for the UK. That range depends on how other carbon reduction measures perform. That's why they have a range like that. So there is the agreement that we do need to reduce this. There's also some very interesting data around this, that there are other aspects to this debate as well, and food waste is one of those that I'd like to draw to your attention. It does quote in the paper that if food waste were a country, it would be the third largest emitting country in the world. So it's clear from that that it's not just our choice of food and how it's produced, how it's grown. It's also around let's stop waste. And I think, and one of our public members mentioned that very eloquently today. So it also in the paper outlines some of the steps that councils around the UK have taken. There are various campaigns that councils can sign up to, and different motions they can pass, different agreements they can join, and a number have taken the step to do just that. There are also councils who have taken an alternative route by trying to embrace what they see as the good in several of those viewpoints, and taking their own way around the issue. And that also is detailed in the report. Also in the report, there is a reiteration of the council's position as set out, as has been mentioned, at full council, but also the drafting of a possible position statement that this committee may like to debate and may like to recommend is adopted. So there's lots of things in there, but as I say, it's not exhaustive. There are some things you won't find in there simply because we didn't have time to look into them. One I will mention is that last year the Vegan Society produced a report of how they ranked councils across the UK, and some of you will have seen this. And BCP Council was ranked as one of the 19 top councils, because the Vegan Society felt that the council had taken steps to demonstrate that vegan choices were available, and were promoting the reduction of meat and dairy in diets. So if you haven't seen that one, do take a look, because it's quite important to see how we are viewed by others. So I hope that the report is sufficient to allow the debate today. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed. Do any councillors have any questions, comments? Councillor Northover.
Can I ask, is it all right to ask Neil questions? Do we already have some sort of policy about sustainable food procurement that we've done before? Because I'm sure we've talked about this over the years.
Yes, in all procurement, there is the requirement to conduct a decision impact assessment. So any procurement decision will have had to look at sustainability issues. And in large procurements, where they go out to tender and contracts are drawn up, sustainability accounts for a certain percentage in the marking of those tenders. So yes, sustainability is included in procurement.
A few years ago also we looked at using local producers for ice creams on the beach rather than huge sort of highly processed products. I can't remember what happened in the end. Do you recall?
I do know. Yeah, it's noted in the report, but it is just a tiny note where we talk about the three large food contracts that the council lets. One being ice cream, as you can imagine, is quite a big one for our destination. And so yes, that's split into two parts. One to provide sort of lolly type things at kiosks on the seafront, but also there's the scoop ice creams in the little pots. And the reason it's split into two is to allow local providers to tender for that, and that the Scoop ice cream contract is held by New Forest Ice Cream, so a local supplier. That I don't know. Right. If it's, I don't know if it's available here, but that's fantastic. There you go. I told you it wasn't an exhaustive paper. Hand on heart, I do not know. No. But if I'd had the time, I would have sampled whatever I could, trust me.
Anybody else got? That's all right.
Can I ask, you cite a couple of councils in here that have taken on the treaty. Do you know how many have had it put to them and rejected it?
I don't know the exact number, but the total number of councils that have adopted it is in the report, it's 6. There are, as I mentioned, alternative campaigns that are promoted, which are not entirely in tune with that, and around about 7 have passed a motion to support that other campaign, which is largely around rural quality of life, etc. The ones that have debated it and chosen another way, I don't know the exact number, but of those, the ones that are notable are Manchester and Bristol, because we follow those very closely in terms of climate activity. And so it's interesting to us how they have chosen to address the subject. And those 2 councils, what they decided is noted in the report. I don't know.
Councillor Goodall.
You mentioned sustainability, but which I understand, but I'd just like to dig a bit deeper about sourcing, because I checked out on some of our contractors who we presently use, particularly for meat. They will tell you specifically where the free range material comes from, but when the sourcing comes to other meats, they don't. So, and I've been onto both websites, both the big suppliers that we use. The bacon comes from the Netherlands, and their bacon is heavy on water. And another supplier is selling colony eggs, and there is no method of checking, impossible to determine the source of material such as egg whites and where it comes from. And I just wondered whether we should not be looking more closely. Sustainability is one thing, but sourcing is also something else that we should be looking at. And that when we contract out, we ask suppliers to make sure their sourcing is visible for everybody.
I certainly agree, but not having intimate knowledge of the council's contracts and that sort of thing, I can't comment any further than that, other than say that if the committee wanted to take it further and have more information, more research, then that's certainly an area that they could look at, and you would need one of our procurement team, I think, to answer the in-depth questions around that. But thank you very much for bringing that up.
I guess, Councillor Gould, that could actually be a recommendation if you wanted to make it one and put a seconder.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a number of things to say on this, so whether or not if I could carry on now, I mean, we've got a major problem with meat. We know we're a small cog in what is a vast subject, and this is the problem. So there are some things that are going to happen which are going to be down to national negotiation, and there are some things that we can help with. So we are conscious of the fact that there are 3 major suppliers of areas in Brazil that are cutting down the rainforests, and there are, so that the American companies, JBS, Marfrig and Minerva, and they do deals with Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, Burger King, McDonald's and KFC. So, and this brings me to lobbying. we're not in a position to lobby, but I think we are in a position to be able to look at how we deal with things. It may even be a planning issue, so that if planning is if you're objecting to a planning application and that is harm, then it could be argued that if people are selling cheap meat that is not carbon neutral in these supermarkets, then perhaps when there's planning permission comes up for this, we should be putting our ideas into motion. And I don't know if it's possible or even practical, but it is something that we should be thinking about. But as a motion, I would like us to deep drill into our suppliers at the very least.
Thank you. Were there any other issues you wanted to do while you've got the floor?
I mean, it seems to me that well, one of the things I wanted to raise in particular was a local issues, or at least having a look at. I mean, I understand officers are incredibly busy and work incredibly hard at doing their jobs. And I also understand that there may be a problem insofar as if they're asked to look at smaller suppliers, that may well double their workload. So this is my ideal philosophy rather than anything that may be practically enable us to do from a practical perspective. But I would like us to be able to look at local areas, more farms to supply us with meat rather than, and perhaps directly from the farms. I would like us to look at farms that are doing have got set aside, being put aside for land for the use of allotments, and encourage farmers markets with no charges for organisers for say a year from us, so that they can set these things up, and there wouldn't be charges for stall holders for the first year, so that small businesses, food businesses, can expand. Anyway, that'll do for the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did you want to respond to any of those?
Just that there's certainly very good ideas there and food for thought. No pun intended.
Does anybody else?
Can I please ask the officer, with regard to the position statement, is there anything in this position statement that BCP Council is not currently doing?
Yeah, my computer's gone off. So, what are there any points that you think that we are not doing in there?
Yeah, in this draft position statement, I just wondered if there's anything in there that we're not currently doing, because reading through that, it seems like we already do all of these things anyway. And perhaps with regard to what my colleague has said to my right here, perhaps we're not looking to be ambitious enough, and the idea of sourcing local meat from local farms where we are using meat might be something that we could add to that, because this just seems like it's setting out what we're already doing, and I'm not sure if there's anything that we're actually, setting ourselves a challenge for. And I know it's difficult to promise to do more, but I just feel that all we're actually doing here with this draft position statement is actually putting down in black and white what we're already doing, rather than being a little bit more ambitious and trying to do a little bit more towards this.
You're right insofar as a lot of that we do already do. It's how much we do. So we're talking there about all of outlets, all of the catering, as opposed to certain proportions. The one thing there that I think we don't necessarily do is the encouraging, promoting, and prioritising plant-based eating within the community. I think we've been a little bit lacking in perhaps explaining, and I think this is the key thing around this. And in the report, it mentions some of those instances where vegetarian and vegan food has been made available, but it hasn't been successful. And I think there is a certain amount of education to be done around that. If choices are there but people aren't taking them, they perhaps don't understand why they should. And so I think for each of those items, we do a little already, but we could do more. And certainly on the education and awareness raising, I think we don't do enough of that at all. And really, that is the area that we could expand.
Councillor Hadley.
Thank you. If I could expand a little bit on that answer, because I think one of the things that across the board in terms of climate, we have an ambition to be rather more active in trying to help the public on energy, on transport, on food. There's the whole range of things that we do. You know, there's something about behaviour change. And I think one of the reasons that we've perhaps been a little bit circumspect in our answers to date on this is because we had to take the public with us. We have to work with the public and actually find a way that helps them in terms of, you know, there's good health reasons why plant-based diet is good. There's financial reasons in terms of the cost. There's ethical reasons in terms of equity, and as one of the speakers mentioned, you know, internationally we import an awful lot of water and resources from developing countries as part of our foods that doesn't get to their domestic supply. So there are all sorts of reasons why it's a great idea to do, and something that we should be doing more of. But we, if we ban anything but plant-based products in our outlets, for example, on the seafront, there are commercial outlets very close to them, and we'll just end up closing our outlets. So there's something about how we do it in a sensible fashion. And I think you're absolutely right with your challenge, and I think, you know, perhaps we could go further, and that may be a recommendation from the committee. But I think we need to redouble our effort on those areas that we're already doing, and also Councillor Herriot is here and has just taken over the commercial service. I'm sure you want to say anything about that, but it's something that I think we have the opportunity to challenge ourselves harder. Thank you.
Councillor Herriot.
I think it's really interesting in the context of that challenge, actually, to go further, given where the National Trust are, and I think they're a really good example that's hit the press this week as they're looking to take their menu 50% vegan. That's across 300 outlets, and that is mainly with items that are already kind of vegan in tendency. So, for example, I'm sure everyone's kind of seen the scone scandal. That scone has been vegan for over 4 years. Not many people really noticed to begin with, and I think that's perhaps where we can make some inroads. But that requires a change in operation for our commercial operations. National Trust have been doing it for a really long time in bigger kitchens with different skill sets, with different models. And I think it would take a deep examination, but I do think shifting some of our menu more vegan where appropriate is certainly something we'd be prepared to have a really strong look at.
Any other councillors got any questions, comments? Councillor Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Chair. Just so a few questions, if that's okay. Firstly, on food procurement, I know it's been said that it's not a lot of maybe knowledge in the room about the detail about all the different contracts, but I'm just wondering if it references supplies to day centres. So obviously day centres being run by Tricuro. So I'm just wondering if we actually do, because part of this was we don't have much impact over different facilities to implement this, even if we were to adopt it. So I was just wondering, is our day centres, I'm just wondering what the relationship is there. Do Tricuro come in with us? Do we buy food on their behalf? Do they not procure their own food? Or I'm just wondering how that would, if we adopted that plant-based treaty, would that all go into the day centres?
Councillor Hadley, any idea on that one?
Well, that has a guess, and it is a guess that the Tricuro would procure their own food. And there is an opportunity for us, because they're a wholly owned company by the council, that we could through contract negotiations with them in terms of the service that they provide, ask them to change their menus and change their procurement. But I don't think we directly dictate their procurement because they are a separate company, separate entity.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Okay, so second one is where we've had the feedback from our outlets. It's reference to the Durley Hub and about introducing plant-based diet at the beginning. I noticed though, I mean, there's a lot of questions in not about plant-based treaty, but it's about what's going on at the Durley Hub, because quite often when I walk past it, it does seem not well used. I know there's plans to sort of change that or to develop it over time. But I'm just wondering how, considering its prime seafront location, how much we can read into that when you look at the figures given for what it's taken over those 9 months last year. Quite low. It was let me just find its page. It was about, yeah, it was around about, yeah, £12,000 for food offering over 9 months, which even just, that was when they reverted back to offering plant-based and non-plant-based options, and that just seems like a really low amount.
Yes.
That figure is not quite right. The total sales, I think, over that period were £140,000. That number in there reflects the hot food sales only in the first quarter from January to April of that year. I think there's obviously a bit of missing context that I queried when I saw that figure, because that was remarkably low. I think given that it had 4 months, I think it's interesting that it probably wasn't given a really big chance, but also the seafront outlets are under significant pressure to deliver revenue that support the council elsewhere, and they have to be pretty commercial in order to do that. And if you think about where they are located, if you're adjacent to a harvester, for example, they're not giving up their commerciality for anyone. So that's the context that those outlets have to live in. But yeah, the Durley Hub, we know, remains a challenge. I was down there over the summer, and it is pretty busy as an outlet. It's just a lot of it is ice cream sales, and obviously that's not reflected in a hot food sales figure.
Then the other question was just about for Woodpecker, in terms of the information they gave in bullet point 1. They said there's a high wastage of alternative milks, and then in the final bullet point they said alternative milks are popular. So just wondering which one it is.
I'll take that again. And this is from experience rather than any information from the council. I was a catering manager in a former life, a cafe that offered alternative milks. It depends on context where you are. Keeping a consistent offer. It also requires, I suppose, a balance. Relatively popular, I think, is probably the word we're looking for in that. But yeah, in different cafes they will have different volumes, and obviously a golf club kind of community cafe offer is very different to a high volume seafront outlet.
So like in places like that, obviously they offer a range of alternative milks. So alternative milks could still be popular, but it could still be a high waste. Is that?
I mean, yes, it depends on the management of it. I would have to kind of ask for a lot more information before I can really answer that in the thing. But yeah, they are, as with any product that you run in a cafe, wastage is an item you monitor carefully. But that's not to say that these things can kind of slip away, shall we say? But yeah, I would have to know in full detail about that cafe before I could answer that properly.
So yeah, I just want to comment on the draft statement, which is, I agree with 2 councillors to my left, which is not, I don't think it's particularly ambitious. I appreciate why there's probably a bit of reticence to adopt the full plant-based treaty, but at the same time I feel like, yeah, the draft statement is just saying, and there's a lot of leeway in that. So if it's felt like we're trying to lay down maybe how we do things, and it needs to be a fair bit more prescriptive as a recommendation from this committee in terms of what that looks like, because there's a lot of stuff that's just, you know, community support to do so. We'll ask for this, we'll put this in here, and it feels like it should be a lot more. I think we should be, yeah, far more prescriptive if that's the midway point between the full plant-based treaty. Because I do feel like when we sat here last time and we're discussing the park, it was sort of a question like we could have brought the public with us on that one, and we went ahead and did something that was quite a contentious issue. And then on this one, we're saying we'll sit back and let the public lead it. And it just feels like we could be maybe playing a bit more of a key role in trying to sort of, yeah, provide something of a high quality and say, like, this is what we can have. And the public come with us in that sense.
Yes. Sorry, Councillor Rice first.
Yeah, can I just get some clarification regarding the plant-based treaty? In my mind, the plant-based treaty was more about moving away from heavily meat and fish and dairy oriented diets to just it being more plant-based, but not necessarily excluding all meat and dairy. So, for example, I would love to have an 80% plant-based menu with a little bit of meat and dairy. And that was my understanding of the plant-based treaty. So can I get clarification on that? And none of the things in there actually say that we would be not eating, necessarily excluding all meat and dairy. There's lots to do with ethical production of food and not expanding new animal farms, but it's not actually talking about veganism. It's just about increasing the amount of veg in our diet.
Neil, can you comment on that?
I think it's, as has been mentioned, it's a call to governments rather than something that is ideal for local councils to adopt. That's just my view. And in doing so, the strength of opinion is around this is a vegan treaty. It is seeking to not have animal and dairy in our diets and to promote veganism, which is entirely a valid point of view, as are many other points of view. So that is my take on it. I wonder if other people in the room who are involved would have a view on that as well.
Sorry, Councillor Herbert.
Thank you. Yes, and I think Councillor Rice is correct. It is about moving the dial significantly, but there is stuff about ceasing investment in farms, fish farms and meat farms, which we have absolutely no control over, and are national matters. So I think that Neil's correct in the sense there are things we cannot influence, and I think that's part of the balance we're trying to tread. We do need to move the dial further. I think I accept that what we prepared is perhaps it could be interpreted as do nothing more than we currently do, and that's certainly not what I intended it to do. But I think equally we cannot adopt. Well, I'm not sure we can adopt all of the aspects in the plant-based treaty because we don't have control over them, and some of them are therefore for government. And the best we could do is to lobby on behalf of our population to central government, as could individuals.
Yeah.
If I may, thank you, Chair. Yes, in putting the paper together, we spoke to Edinburgh Council, who are held up quite rightly as one of the trailblazers in adopting the treaty and adopting an action plan and taking action on it. And I think it's fair to say, and it's again some of the details in the report, that even though Edinburgh have signed the treaty and clearly have adopted it, their action plan, what they're planning to do, is rather more along the lines of awareness raising. So rather than saying everyone in Edinburgh will not eat meat, they are trying to raise awareness that meat and dairy consumption should be reduced. So even those authorities that have adopted it are taking a very mature, if you like, view of what they can do. So I think that is worth bearing in mind.
Any other questions? Yes, sorry, Councillor Ricketts.
Thank you. Going back to the position statement, the draft position statement that we're being asked to consider tonight as well. If we're going to adopt something along these lines, I also think it needs to be measurable. It's all very well saying this, but how are we going to measure our success against it? And how are we going to report back on that success? So I think that needs to be considered if we're going to adopt this. Thank you.
Do you want to comment on that? Thank you.
I do. It's pleasing that these are the sort of comments that are coming, because the whole point of the paper is to create a discussion, and so it's brilliant. So thank you very much. Sorry, what was the measurable? Yes. Sorry, I digressed. In the paper, it does mention how you can measure emissions from food production, food consumption, because of course some of you who have seen the papers that we produce around our climate action will know that that is not included in it, because it's one of the more trickier and less developed things. But in the paper, it does mention some of the emerging systems. WRAP, the waste charity, have come up with one for businesses to use, and there are others. That one being the Harriet Watt University in Edinburgh that was mentioned by one of the public questions, is being trialled on carbon labelling. So it is difficult. We don't do it yet, but there are things emerging that may well enable us to measure it. But it will be complex to do. But as you say, if we're going to do something, if we're going to put resources towards something, we do need to measure it.
Respond as well.
Thank you. Yes. Well, again, it's something I've been challenging the team, and Neil's been rising to the challenge in terms of measuring our carbon impact in a much more visible way through dashboards. And I think that if that's a recommendation from the committee, I think it could be to actually look at these and try and find a measurable target for what we've written here. Is something that we could commit to, and it may not measure the whole journey, but it would show positive progress towards those things, and actually that we are rising to a challenge. So I think we'd have to talk to people like procurement and other departments within the council in order to come up with what the appropriate measures and targets would be. But I think that's something that we could look to do.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Sorry, Councillor Rice. Councillor Harris wanted to come in.
I just wanted to come back to my earlier question on whether they're actually calling for a ban on meat. So in Wikipedia, it's saying an end to the expansion of animal agriculture. It doesn't mention anything to do with actually not eating meat and completely, and the promotion of a shift to sustainable plant-based diets. Fundamentally, I think I would like the council to be as ambitious as possible, and one of the few things that we can do is have sort of a presence and a guidance to the population and show leadership. And so I think it's important that we have declared a climate emergency, and for me this is very much linked into the carbon footprint of food, as well as the ethical aspects of it, and the health aspects are huge. So measuring the carbon footprint would be extremely important. Yeah, but I would like us to be as ambitious as possible.
Thank you. Microphone, Councillor Harriet.
I'm actually going to take us in a slightly different direction, and I apologise for that. But actually, there's no mention in the treaty that I can see about skills and enabling people to be able to cook with food that is kind of from scratch and healthy and vegan. And I think that's something that actually societally there is a significant gap, particularly in areas that are deprived, as mentioned in the treaty. And I think actually that's would be almost more impactful than a lot of that work. But I cooked a vegan curry for 200 people at the weekend in an area that is deprived, and it's that gap is really significant for some communities, and there are some really great charities out there doing some amazing work with food, and enabling them and encouraging them, I think, is something that could be looked at in the context of this.
Thank you. Councillor Goodall.
I just wanted to raise one point, and I'll throw it in there because it may come from a position of ignorance. But one of the things that hasn't been raised in this report is the issue of diabetes. I just wondered, because at the moment, diabetes costs the NHS 14 million, a billion, I beg your pardon, billion a year, just to throw in there. And I just went onto the diabetes website and looked up, and there's an issue with diet. And people who are diagnosed as pre-diabetic, a lot of them are trying to diet their way out of their type 2 pre-diabetes, and they are going for fresh meat, eggs and cheese, because that's high fat, low carbs, and you can diet your way out of it. And I just wondered, I don't know the answer to this, but I just wondered if that was something that we should be looking at or comparing with a plant-based treaty, as opposed to these people who actually need a high fat, high meat diet. Just wanted to say further, since I've just the other thing I got from the diabetes thing website, since 1996, the number of people diagnosed with diabetes in the UK has risen from 1.4 million to 3.9 million, and expected to rise to 5.3 million in 2025. And that's just the people that have been diagnosed, not the ones that are possibly or have it but haven't been diagnosed.
Thank you, Councillor Good. Microphone. Can you put your microphone?
Sorry.
It's all right. I think we need to be a little careful on that one, not to err into health and giving health advice. That's not really our role. Councillor Hadley, you want to respond?
Well, I was going to respond slightly on that, the health front, because Public Health England, I think, would promote actually a lower meat diet in general, and so I think we need to be slightly careful about picking out one specific diet in that way. Pre-diabetes is partly caused by eating too much sugar and processed foods, and that's processed both meaty foods and non-meaty foods. So it's about better fresh food of all sorts doesn't get us into pre-diabetes, and better exercise. There's a whole raft of things in there, but as you say, that's more of a health issue.
Councillor Northover.
Thank you. I just had a couple of sort of reservations that I wondered about. One thing is that quite often meat-free products end up being like quite processed, and I wouldn't want us to end up buying a load of packaged processed stuff to meet a sort of written down target. And my partner is celiac, and quite often we go to places and there's sort of like a sort of, people will pick either gluten-free or vegan often, and recently he's really sort of lost out in this sort of which is more popular, because say something like a sausage, once it becomes a meat-free sausage, it's suddenly got gluten in. So maybe you might have been able to, you know, we're not eating out all the time, but it quite often is, you know, we really need to eat something. We might be out and about and there's hardly anything he can eat anyway. And then often these things have been replaced, making it impossible for him to have anything at all. So I just really would want to be cautious that we didn't do this sort of thing where we make this declaration and then go and do something even worse, that is less healthy and even has more packaging to it as well. And I've got another point maybe after, because I think you're eager to
reply to the first one. And that goes directly back to skilling people to be able to cook rather than rely on kind of hyper processed food. There is a lot of meat replacement vegan food that is really very processed. But actually, that cooking from scratch with products makes that difference. And the vegan curry I cooked is gluten-free as well. You're welcome to the recipe.
Yeah, I guess though, when we're talking about some of our outlets, then it's just really high turnover and maybe not set up to do that sort of thing.
And that's a real challenge, is keeping up with the pace that you need, particularly in a high turnover environment, and balancing those products and the availability and the cost and all of those things play a factor. But I think it's really tricky because there is always that balance. We could probably lean a bit further that way, but it does require a significant kind of deep dive into the examination of it, rather than just yeah, we can go vegan, or like certainly head significantly further in that direction. I don't want to say it's all vegan again, sorry.
Yeah, because when I was looking at the equality impact assessment, I think that might need to be thought about, that by making things one way, we're not, I would say that some allergies could be considered a disability, so those weren't covered in the equality impact assessment. The other point I just wanted to make was that I would hate, when we were talking about day centres, I would hate to see that some unsuspecting elderly people who really enjoy their food become the people that sort of have to, we're dictating what they end up eating or something like that, just to make us all feel better. And they're sort of there bewildered going, why is my nice thing that I really like having each week? So I hope that we do some consultation with people to make sure they're actually happy with them. And the same like with staff here, I think it has to be what they want. Yeah.
I think the word that I'm hearing quite a lot, in a sense, is the word choice, which is really what you've just said. I heard it from one of our earlier speakers, struggling to get choice for her children in the school, which sort of seems mad, doesn't it, when this is better? But I remember when I was on health and we looked at children's diet in school meals and why they couldn't eat all the chocolate biscuits they were given. It was just nuts. So, we do have a responsibility around children and health. We may not control the school, but it's that influence again that we're talking about. I think the other thing that seems to relate, certainly, if we pull it apart and we've got this sort of overview, supporting, encouraging type role, which is conurbation wide, applies to everybody. But I think there's also what I'll call the direct controls, leaving Tricuro out just because they're a slightly separate company anyway. We're not quite sure where they'll sit within that. But one of the things I think I felt when we, in reading this, that I wasn't sure whether we'd really assessed or were set up even to particularly know what we were doing. I think it's perhaps something that's new, and maybe going forward we could ask if it was possible in some way to structure the reporting, or for you, that we would then know its impact, its cost. I mean, if you look at the Derby Hub, they're still selling 1/3 is vegan. And I would suggest there's a lot less than 1/3 of people are vegan. Now, obviously, that could be because people are buying chips, which just happens to be vegan. So, there's obviously that impact. But if we can't drill down on the numbers and understand what's going on, so if we knew what, for example, percentage of a menu is vegan, can we identify, I would have thought it might be reasonable to go as far as to say, well, let's try and get at least one vegan main menu option, like you're saying for your husband, can't have gluten-free. But I completely accept that we can't turn everything over, otherwise we'll end up with all our beachfront closing, and then they'll have to go to places that aren't vegan. So it's about, to me, that's why I think it's all about the choice and the option. And I just wondered whether, I know you're new to the portfolio, but whether you could look to the sort of reporting system so that we can get more information as we go forward. Because, and it goes back to Councillor Rickett's point, we need to measure. What are we doing now so that we know whether we're doing more in the future? It may just be me being well over 60, but the truth is, in my view, this is something that has grown over the years. We have a number of restaurants in the town now that are vegan that weren't there 10, 15 years ago. And so we need to measure where we are as a baseline so that we can then say, okay, we're being successful in-house. There's more demand, not to force anybody to it. But when people don't even have the choice, That seems to me that that's perhaps something that we should be addressing within our direct realm of control, if people would agree with that. Any other comments from anybody on that basis? Councillor Martin.
Yeah, well, just going back to how we're going to monitor this. So, for instance, like the first 2 bullet points within the draft charter, I mean, if there's no community support to do so, then like the first 2 bullet points don't really happen, do they? So it's like things. So how would you even measure? So we're going to take a lead where it has influence and community support to do so, but if it doesn't have community support to do so, then we won't force, and then we'll take a step back, and then we've not met like 1 and 2, so we're not even really adopting points 1 and 2.
Councillor Hadley. Sorry, Councillor Harris.
I don't want to kind of answer for another portfolio, and it's actually not anyone that's in this room, but actually we do have some strong food links, the Access to Food Partnership, that we could perhaps do some more monitoring with in the community in terms of how that food is going out in the food bank. Now that is speculation rather than a definitive answer, but we do have some links within the community that can kind of see where that is going, certainly on one front, but I think the wider community is much harder to measure.
Do you want to come back on that, Councillor Martin?
No, other than to say really that it just sort of feels like a doctriness. I'm not really sure. Is this something? It's all things to everyone. I just feel, and I'm just not quite sure. It said, it sounds good to adopt and say let's recommend this because it's overall it's a positive statement. It's just I just don't feel like there's enough detail behind it to sort of say, yeah, we've made a really good recommendation here, and I know exactly where, I know in 6 months, 12 months, 5 years time, how all this different stuff is being measured, and if someone's actually put the effort into to make it work, or whether it's been like, no, there's just no uptake, the community still doesn't want it, all that kind of thing. It's like a lot of easy get outs on this. I'm not saying people would purposely do that, but just that's how I feel the statement sits, to be honest.
No, I think you have a valid comment on the first point that, it's not about whether there's community. We want to encourage and lead whether there's community support or not. I don't think we need community support for that decision because, again, if you go back to this word choice, we're not forcing anybody to do anything. It is good for people's health. And why would we not want people to live healthy lives, in my view? So I think that first one may justify an amendment, if I'm honest. I don't know whether, Neil, you wanted to comment on that?
Only that's the sort of decision we're expecting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor.
Yeah, I'd really like to. I know this is it's probably geeky, but I'd like to see this applied to SMART. So we've got it time bound, we've got it measurable, we make sure it's achievable, so that we actually come back perhaps with something based on this, but with those KPIs, so that we can actually see how we're going to achieve this, what our baseline is, and what we consider to be a success. So, I mean, for example, if we're encouraging residents to shop locally where possible, that's great, that's lovely, but how are we going to do that? How is it going to be measurable that we're actually doing this? Where are we seeing this being encouraged and promoted? We want to promote and encourage food waste reduction where possible. Well, where is that measurable? Is that measurable in what we're, as residents, sending to food waste, to compost? Is that actually, can we actually measure that? Are we seeing that we're encouraging less, or do we want to be encouraging more food waste compost? It's almost sort of counterproductive with that. I just think that we if we're going to set something out and we're going to say, look, we really want to do our best with this, I just think we need to be assured that it is achievable. It's within this council term that we can do it, so it is time bound and it is measurable.
Yes, I have.
Thank you. Yes,
I appreciate that's really restating what you said before in terms of smart targets, and absolutely accept that. I think, you know, and actually to your point, there's the committee are suggesting that we should go further and harder in terms of what we can do, but we need to make sure that those are measurable. And we have the head of environment here who's responsible for waste. And one of the things with food waste is that we do know how much food waste we process, and where people are returning to us rather than composting it themselves. So we can measure the amount of food waste in the Bournemouth and Christchurch area. We can't yet in Poole, but part of moving towards food waste in Poole, actually experience shows that people, when they're throwing away food separately, they realise how much food they're throwing away, and sometimes that has a beneficial effect in terms of not buying it in the first place or reducing the waste. So I think we do have ways of measuring food waste at that level, and then also talking to the food banks and those that are receiving and trying to recycle food that goes through other streams. There are measures. I don't want to promise them now because I don't think we've got the detail to be sure on the metrics, but I think we need to actually go away and come back with a proposal which does cover that. And I think, you know, in that first bullet point said about where's community support to do so, that's a key bit about choice. We can't, you know, if you just take it and say, well, we want you to eat less meat, or Councillor Hadley says you should eat less meat. That's not, you know, that's not great in terms of the population. We need to encourage people, tell them reasons why it's good, help them towards thinking, believing themselves that it's a good thing to do. And some of that, you know, is just about what we can achieve in the next term and in a smart, meaningful way.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
I wanted to ask about carbon labelling on menus and things like that. How does that work?
What was the exact question?
Carbon labelling. It talks in here about carbon labelling. I assume that's something on a menu so that you can make a choice. Right. Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's what the Heriot-Watt University is doing for Edinburgh Council. They're trialling a scheme where it will say on a menu, this dish created X kilograms of or grams of carbon dioxide equivalent. So it will, I mean, it is controversial. It's probably a bit too strong, but it's questionable by some people how effective it is to see that sort of thing next to a dish. I'm sure there are all sorts of other ways of doing it, like the dietary labelling that you see, the traffic light system on foods now. But the effectiveness of it is in question. And as I say, the Heriot-Watt University is trialling a system. They're coming up with a system because no single system exists at the moment which is widely used, to see if they can come up with one that will suffice and actually guide people correctly, that people recognise and act upon.
What's your understanding of the accuracy of that? That, you know, that's how it would, you have traffic lights or words or numbers or something. What's your understanding of how accurate that is?
At the moment, it's not very, which is the problem. There are, as I say, there are some embryonic ways of doing it. If you Google search, you will find various companies and initiatives that will do that for you. But certainly the food industry queries whether any of them are actually sufficient and accurate enough. And it could be, if you've got different schemes and companies choose different schemes, if those schemes don't align, then it makes a nonsense of the whole thing.
Yeah, I agree. I read a report from a paper from Metropolitan University London that says it's virtually impossible to measure carbon for any one item. And as soon as you start mixing it together in a meal, making it have several items in that, it's virtually impossible to measure the carbon. They give the example of a lettuce from Spain and a lettuce from Holland. Your supplier, you might get the country of origin from your supplier, but you won't get where it's from, and it might be the Dutch one day and the Spanish one the next day. So you couldn't be changing your menus every day. So I think that's something that would need to be looked at very closely, because it looks like it's virtually impossible to actually label carbon on a menu.
Yes, exactly, and that's why no one is rushing to adopt any one system until they've been sort of tested, and there is some assurance that what you're adopting is accurate.
Well, thank you everyone for contributions to that. I think that probably is about the right time to wrap this up. This is obviously what I call a very early stage, and I think a lot of what we've said is really around, we can see ways this could be evolved and perhaps brought back at some later date as we go further. Just particularly for the members of the public, it's very important to understand that essentially this committee is not the decision-making committee. We don't say, yes, we're going to do this as a council. All we can do, this length of our, would be to make a recommendation to Cabinet, that they're the ones who will be then taking the decisions forward, of course. So it's important to understand it's not that we're ducking a responsibility to make a decision. It's not our job. Our job is to do that preliminary investigation, make recommendations, try and move this further down the road. So I think this is probably a good moment to have a 5-minute break. That will allow us to allow members of the public who don't want to remain any further, get our chair back. So if we just pause for 5 minutes, thank you. Yes, indeed.
Can I just clarify that the committee doesn't want to make any formal recommendations on this at this stage? Because there's been various things suggested. I just want to be really clear whether you are making any recommendations or whether you're just going along the line of you've made comments and you're hoping that the portfolio holder and the officer have taken them on board.
I'd like to vote against it.
Okay. There are no recommendations on the table. Lots of things have been suggested. I'm just saying, if you want to form any recommendations, something needs to be moved and seconded. You don't have to form any at all, but I just wanted clarity around that position for the committee.
Councillor Martin, you look like you want to say something.
Well, yeah, I feel like for recommendation would require us to sort of rewrite some of this and to put in various amendments into this amongst us, or to take it away and to come back with it at some other time. In a sense, can we take this out of the group, work on it and bring it back here? Because I can recommend that we support this treaty. I don't have a problem with that, but not with the position statement. Don't have a problem with that, but also we've all said there's plenty of work that can be done on that, and actually we'd like to be recommending something maybe a bit stronger and with more detail, more like KPIs and just everything behind it.
Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chair. I think this isn't a decision that's coming to Cabinet, so it's not something that you need to maybe make a recommendation for change on a decision. I welcome the debate that we've had, and certainly will take on board all the points raised, including the concerns about measuring the carbon impact in menus. And if it's useful to the community to have it come back to you at a later date, very happy to bring it back to you. But I'm not sure, it's for you whether you want to make a recommendation, but particularly the making it measurable, making it more challenging to ourselves are things that I think we take away from it.
So Ricketts, you indicated.
I'm inclined to propose that we consider the council's position statement, the draft position statement, but ask that this is brought back with how this will be measured, how it meets the SMART criteria to be specific, to be measurable, to be attainable, and to be time bound, and to see actually whether we can just tease this out a little bit more, to be a little bit more ambitious. I'm happy to propose that if anybody is happy to second that, so we get another bite at this cherry, but it is based around this position statement, but just stating how we can see that it's measurable, the reporting back to us as a council to prove that we are actually doing something positive on this. Because I'm sure that we are, But, you know, if we're doing 10% now, I want to make sure that if we're aiming to do 50% of what we're saying, that we can actually do that. So it's got to be achievable as well. That's really important. It must be achievable. So
That's what you.
Yeah, I'm happy to second that because I think it's really important. We had a great discussion here today. Lots of great points have come up, but I fear we'll all walk away from this and nothing further will happen. So I think having the recommendation that Councillor Ricketts has just said means we'll come back to this. We will look at measurability, we'll give it more teeth and take it further, and then maybe have something to recommend that the Cabinet looks at in the near future.
On that basis, can I just see a show of hands for those who would support that recommendation? Yeah. I think that's unanimous, isn't it? Okay, so that's obviously carried. So if we could ask Neil to take it away, I've been making notes about things. I'll drop you an email, and then it will come back at a time. We'll agree in the programme and when it fits in with yours. But thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your time. As I said, we will pause for just 5 minutes. We reconvene at past. That will enable the chair to return, and public, if they want to leave, they can do and not be here for the other bits. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. Really interesting sitting in the public gallery and listening to that debate, and really difficult not to try and jump up and get involved for a change. So I think I've done well biting my tongue. Just before we move on to item 7, I just want to say that last debate that we had, and the reason why it got here for anyone who still might be listening, is that residents came to full council, a great number of them, with questions and statements about a particular issue, which we then, as an overview and scrutiny committee, thought this is a good idea. Why don't we try and get involved as early as we possibly can, start seeing why, and show real engagement with members of the public and what they're bringing and what they want to see this council do. And this early scoping work, I think, is a great opportunity and really demonstrates how the direction which we want to see this overview and scrutiny committee moving in, not just scrutinising cabinet papers which are almost ready and making minor changes, but really trying to see what is on the future agenda and how we can have involvement in the shaping of policy. So I've really welcomed that and really enjoyed it. So on to item number 7, which is our budget presentations, where we're going to have a couple of presentations from Glyn Barton, our Chief Operations Officer, and Kelly Dean, Director of Communities and Housing. But first, I'm going to hand over to Lindsay just to give a bit of an overview on that, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to sort of couch this in terms of the whole programme of work we're doing around budget, just as a reminder, but hopefully members are now really familiar with this following communications that have gone out. So this year there's a far more planned approach, I would say, to involving wider member engagement and scrutiny engagement in the developing budget. This is, tonight we've got step 2 and 3 of a 9-stage process of opportunities to engage in the budget. Members have already had the benefit of a training session around budget that happened earlier in the summer. And then tonight you're going to have a presentation that gives you an overview of where we're at with the budget, some key areas to be aware of in terms of directorates. So hence we've got one from Glyn for the Operations Directorate, and we've got one covering the relevant areas for the committee around housing from the Wellbeing Directorate. Following that, at item 8 on your agenda, you'll be asked if you want to take up the opportunity to set up a working group to do a deep dive around some particular areas of budget. So I would just say to really bear in mind throughout these presentations if there are any areas that come up that you think really would warrant some extra scrutiny in terms of budget, as these would be areas that would be good to isolate for that working group. And also just to bear in mind that the presentations that have been prepared for members have been, very fully put together with the help of finance colleagues as well. And these are related to directorates. So the directorates do not very helpfully align to the ONS committee. So there's some overlap across between Environment and Place and ONS board. So hopefully we'll stay very clearly in the Environment and Place areas. But if we do start to stray into the other areas, I might just pull us back in and give the chair a heads up. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Glyn, welcome to your first Environment and Place meeting. Yeah, if you'd like to give us your presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair, and evening, everyone. So I'm Glyn Barton. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for the council. I've been here, it's just 3 months now, so I've brought some friends along with me. So I've got Chantel from our business partner. I've got Kate, who looks after environment, Amanda, who looks after our commercial operations, and Wendy, who looks after planning over there. So hopefully we'll be fully covered for any questions you may have. I've got a presentation that I'd like to share, which Chantel's hopefully going to drive for me. So if we skip on a couple of slides. Brilliant. So this is the operations budget effectively for 24-25. I think it's worth noting here that operations generates £114 million worth of income to the council, which covers a significant proportion of its costs. There is still a cost to the council that is around about £60 million in the accounts, but some of that is covered by other income streams
such as grants that aren't captured in the accounts in this way. So it isn't quite 60 million that operations costs the council. I think it's also worth us just being aware that a lot of this expenditure is statutory, particularly within the planning, the transport and the environment area, areas such as waste management. The current expenditure on that is around 17 million, unless we can significantly reduce the amount of waste that households produce. That's a statutory requirement for us to spend that money to collect that waste. So if we go on to each of the areas within operations that this committee covers, we can start with Kate's environment area. This is the budget for 24-25. So you'll see there that expenditure is around 66 million and income is 26.5 million there. But I think the more important slide is the next one, which covers our year-to-date position. So effectively, where we are in terms of our projected outturn for environment this year is that we're looking to be around about, at present, given everything we know, £468,000 to the goods. So a saving there of £468,000. So that's derived through neighbourhood services and ground maintenance. So there's around about 150k of savings there. Kate's been holding vacancies really tightly there and also operating a strict spend freeze. I think it's worth just noting on that spend freeze that although we're forecasting savings because of that, we are likely to see an increase in repairs in future years as things haven't been repaired proactively because of that spend freeze. We've also got £100,000 saving in the coroners and mortuary area. That's because there's not a service lead in that area at the moment. But that does fluctuate, and a lot of that fluctuation is out of our hand depending on what happens with the number of cases that comes into the coroner's domain. So that's the environment piece. If we go on to planning and transport, it's a bit of an odd one, this, in that within the same type of financial package, you have all of the planning areas as well as having our transport expenditure there as well. So overall for Wendy's budget in planning and transport, expenditure is just over £18.5 million, and we bring in around about £5.5 million there in income. So again, the interesting slide I think is the next slide, which is the projected outturn for planning and transport. So this is an area, particularly in planning, where we have an overall pressure. That's resulting from the use of agency staff, which have traditionally been used by the council to fill vacancies within the planning department. We have mitigations in place to reduce these agency costs, but until we can achieve full recruitment of full-time employees there, we are having to overspend on agency staff there to make sure that we can handle the number of planning applications that we have. I think it's fair to say that we expect the outturn at the end of the year to be much better. I've got confidence that it'll be much better than the position that we outline here. Wendy came in under a year ago now. She's worked really hard to turn around the position in planning and transport. At the end of the last financial year, so 23-24, the outturn was an overspend of £1.8 million. There, she's already brought that overspend down significantly, and I've got confidence that she'll keep doing that and keep working hard to recruit the permanent staff into her area. So if we move then on to the FSERM, so the Coastal Erosion Management budget, effectively £2.3 million expenditure, £1.4 million income. There is a cost to the council there. But again, there are grants that come in that help us to cover some of that sits outside of the financing here. The FSERM team are very confident there's going to be no variance to their budget for year end. So, and I've got no reason to doubt their position. So if we then move on to the overall operations position for year end, so 24-25, we're looking at the moment, and outside of this committee, the main driver here is an overspend in parking and services that we need to bring in, which is looking at driving us to a £2.8 million project overspend, projected overspend by the end of the year. We are working hard to reduce that at present and have a number of strategies in place to make sure that we offset that overspend. So that's the projected outturn for year at the moment. I think it's fair to say that many of the services at the start of the year, particularly in Q1, will get all of the bad news out on the table and then work hard to bring that in. And I think that's why we're at this £2.8 million, and we know where our issues are, and we'll be starting to address those quite quickly. So then if we go on to future, to savings, I think alongside that message around the outturn for year end, I think it's really important to just consider where operations have been this year and the savings that have been made across the operational directorates. So we've achieved the 23% saving against our current net budget, which is quite significant. So to put that into numbers for you, out of the £14 million savings declared as part of the 24-25 budget setting process, we're on track to deliver 13,936,000 of those. So we've got around about 149k outstanding of our projected savings to achieve, which I think is testament to the work that the team have done to make sure that we bring those savings in. You can see some examples of where we've saved that money and we'll be saving that money in the year on the right hand side of the slide there. So increasing in fees, looking at harmonisation of our beach hut fees, for instance, reduction in our leisure centre subsidies, ground maintenance service reduction, looking at how we fund our economic development team, and looking at school crossing patrols, for instance. So it's just a selection of savings items on the slide there. Now, if we move to the next slide, which looks at our medium-term financial plan and the savings that we need to make in coming years. So effectively, the bottom line is the line that is important here. So we've got £2.6 million to find in 25-26, 2.2 in 26-27, and 2 million in 27-28. Now that doesn't take into account any further pressures or any further savings that we might have to find because of other pressures across the council. So where are we with achieving those savings? I think it's fair to say in operations and environment, we're on track to achieve those savings in 25-26. We have a red traffic light against our planning charges. A lot of that is driven by submission of the local plan and not being able to do anything around those charges until the local plan gets determined effectively. So we're in the hands of the local plan process there. Moving on, we do also have some significant pressures in the coming year and years. So most of these are outlined here. A lot of inflationary pressure that we're going to have to absorb. There's quite a lot of investment in ICT systems, for instance, in here, increase in fuel, increase in commercial waste disposal pressures, that type of thing. So it's just giving a view on some of the things that we're going to have to bring into the budget and absorb, as well as making those savings. So if we move on then to some of the key themes and challenges that we've got. So headwinds that we're facing into. So we've got seasonality and whether that has a significant impact on our income. We're still just waiting for the summer figures, but we haven't seen a great summer weather-wise, which will have a significant impact on parking and commercial income on the seafront in particular. Contract inflation, particularly around our parking transactions, is a significant headwind for us. Inflation linked to pay. Our income is rising, which is good, but our costs are increasing faster, so that's something we need to address in a way that we let our contracts look at our contracts going forward. And obviously we've got the political changes causing financial uncertainty, not necessarily to us, but to a lot of our supply chain. And hopefully the October budget will allow us to at least see how that might fall out a little bit and help settle that. So going forward, we do have some opportunities. We're looking at additional income generating opportunities. Obviously, we're continuing to bid for grants to achieve service ambitions. We're looking at accurate and aligned capital recharges. We're reviewing our fees and charges. We're looking to reduce agency workers. Obviously, looking to make sure we're as efficient as possible, looking at our staffing and restructure opportunities, reviewing our non-statutory services, and also, of course, looking at the use of our systems and harmonisation. So that's a quick fly through of operations and where we are, some of our pressures and where we've achieved savings. Happy to take questions now if you want to move on to Kelly's presentation, Chair. It's down to you.
Thanks, Glyn. I was just thinking about that actually. There's quite a lot to absorb in that, so thanks very much. I think I'll ask the committee. Do you think would you prefer to hear Kelly's presentation now, and then we can have the allotted time for questions at the end to see which way they want to go, or do you want to split the item in half and do questions for Glyn and then do the separate housing bit, or is no one particularly bothered? If not, what I'll probably do then is invite Kelly to do her presentation, and then we can absorb that and run through both sets of questions together, if that's all right. And Kelly, you're ready.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I'll just share my screen. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kelly Dean. I'm Director of Housing and Communities. I sit in the Wellbeing Directorate, and Gillian Kay, our Corporate Director for Wellbeing, is also here this evening on screen. Hopefully you can see her. So similar format to the presentation that Glyn has just given, but obviously slightly more focused in terms of housing and communities. I just wanted to have a quick reminder of who we are in housing communities, what we do. So this is myself and my management team, and for future reference, these are the different services that we provide. So community safety and engagement, led by Cat Macmillan, public protection, led by Sophie Stajic. Those two services do actually fall into the remit of the overview and scrutiny main panel. The two areas that are of relevance to the environment and place panel are BCP Homes, although we're not covering the housing revenue account this evening. There are elements in relation to spend around housing in that area. And then strategic housing and partnerships is a very big area that's mainly focused around our response to housing need, homelessness, and those sorts of issues. So this is our gross and net expenditure. We have just over £29 million worth of gross expenditure in housing and communities, with just under 9 of that as a net position, and that's split across some of those service areas that I just outlined. And then our income, just to break that down, obviously considerable amount of income, a really heavy reliance on government grants, and on service fees and charges. The service fees and charges tend to be more in the public protection area, with the government grants and that heavy reliance being more in the homelessness side. Our expenditure, The big issue, big areas, as you would expect, are employees, and then third-party payments, which might be commissioning, housing-related support, or of course bed and breakfast costs, and any number of different areas of spend within those couple of big items. So our end of year forecast position is a small forecast overspend. We had a number of savings, which I'll briefly outline in a moment. A number of savings to meet for this financial year. And we have achieved all of those, but there was a small delay in terms of one of our restructures. That's now complete. We will deliver that saving in 25-26, but it has resulted in a small overspend. We think we can probably mitigate that, and we're working on that basis. Other budgetary considerations for us in year, we received a growth item for this year of 1.5 million to accommodate our bed and breakfast pressures. We've really done a huge amount of work in terms of reducing our number of people placed into bed and breakfast. We've achieved a 35% reduction since October last year, and the vast majority of that has been around homeless prevention and increasing our preventative activity. But there's also been a significant programme of acquisitions of properties that we are then using as temporary accommodation. We have a homelessness prevention reserve, which is all of our grant funding that we receive from the government, and that really helps us to balance the books as far as bed and breakfast pressures go. But it's always one to be careful of, and I'll mention it again when it comes to future issues. It's one to be careful of because ultimately B&B demand is quite unpredictable, and there are a number of different external factors that can influence that. We've got, especially having achieved acquisitions of 90 new temporary accommodation homes, we now have 700 temporary accommodation units that we manage and have people living in across BCP that are owned by the council, managed by our subsidiary Seascape Homes and Property and in various other means. We really do now need a strategy that helps us to understand what our long-term requirements look like and how we make best use of the stock and which models are right going forward. There are some significant maintenance requirements coming up around garages. That does provide some income for us, and that is positive, but ultimately in the long run, some of those garages are in really poor condition. And so there's an asset management strategy approach that's needed there to think about actually, what is the long-term viability of some of those sites, and could those sites be used for alternative uses? And not within the housing space, but we do have a couple of judicial reviews where there may be some recoverable costs depending on the outcome, but we do have a couple of judicial reviews in the public protection space that are pending. So relatively confident about our position at the moment in terms of just a small overspend, but there are some factors that may change that. So you've seen this slide in Glyn's presentation as well. This is my very much smaller version of that for housing and communities, and that shows our medium-term financial plan position over the next few years in terms of savings required. And this slide shows the pressures. So we've got some requirements in terms of similar to what Glyn has outlined actually in relation to inflationary pressures around some of our contracts. The only one really that relates to as a pressure to housing in terms of the scope of this conversation this evening is the ongoing increase that we've added into the medium-term financial plan to support our housing related support contracts. So these are our savings. There's the savings for housing communities for this year. We're just over 1.6 million, and I'm really pleased to say that that it is all complete. One of my portfolio holder, in fact, challenged me on that recently because he felt that might be a little bit too good to be true. I can absolutely assure you that it has been achieved, but it has not been easy. We have, in particular around public protection, reduced our service down to statutory functions only, and that puts the services under quite some considerable pressure. And there are a number of different lots of different ways that we've made savings, but that is a particular area of pressure, not for this committee, but certainly these savings didn't come easy. So in terms of the key themes going forward, I mentioned bed and breakfast, and I wonder if bed and breakfast and temporary accommodation is something that the panel might want to consider in terms of working groups going forward. It's very broad, the subject. You know, if you just look at the placement in bed and breakfast and the cost of that, that's one element, but there are a number of different factors that influence that, and that automatically leads into those requirements around temporary accommodation. We probably have some room for increasing our recovery of debts relating to bed and breakfast, and also rent deposit loans. So where the council provides support for people to move into the private rented sector with a rent deposit loan, there is some work that we're talking to other local authorities about, where they're really proactively recovering more of their debt around those areas than we've been able to do so far. And just to make the point that there is a really careful balance in terms of, you know, the new acquisitions, 90 new properties that we've acquired will really reduce our bed and breakfast numbers over the coming months, and that will reduce our spend on B&B. But actually, that it has to be balanced against the additional borrowing costs that come with that. So it's an important sort of caveat in terms of the savings. We will be going out to recommission all of our housing related support contracts. We've already seen that there are some budget pressures there that we've included in terms of inflationary increases, but of course need is increasing all the time, and that's a really difficult area for us to look at. We want to make sure that we commission the right services. I won't mention our CCTV contract because it's not in scope, but again, inflationary increases ultimately there. We need to make sure, as I mentioned earlier, we've got 700 temporary accommodation properties. We need to make sure that we have, in the long term, the right investment to manage and maintain those properties. So that, again, could be an area that is of interest. And always a risk for us because that huge chunk of the pie chart that you saw, that where we have a reliance on grant, is the potential for the removal or reduction in grant funding. That would have a huge impact for us in housing on staffing. It would really put pressure on our base budgets, and it would hugely impact on our commissioning activity. I've already made the point that we're working to a statutory minimum in the majority of services, but there are a couple of exceptions. One is CCTV, one is CSAS, our community safety accredited officers, and one area is community development. Now they're all they don't fall in within the scope of this panel, but important to note that there are very few discretionary services that are left in housing and communities. And I've already mentioned the sorts of things that we're going to be looking to focus on in terms of achieving increased debt recovery. But just to reassure you that we have absolutely, and it's included in the tables that I've shown in terms of the budget savings, we've reviewed every single fee, every charge. We've looked to increase and maximise our income and ensure that we adopt that cost recovery approach across everything we do in housing and communities. And so the way forward for us really at this point is to think about systems and working practices and pursue more modern and efficient ways of working, and looking at that through sort of transformation type work. I think those next steps are probably what Lindsay's already covered, so I will finish there and hand back to Councillor Rigby.
Thanks, Kelly. Once again, a lot for us to digest and think about there. So, committee, you'll probably seen that our next item is whether we want a working group on the budget for the Scoping report, which I think we'll probably find that we do. So this is an opportunity to really sort of explore and see what questions you want answering now, which will help us decide on that in the next item. So would anyone like to start? with that sort of enthusiasm, I best had, hadn't I? Because I wrote down some things. Glyn, I think the first one's for you because I've had more time to think about what I was writing down. So sorry about that. And actually, maybe for Kate, I was just looking at where you were going through the operations budget, where the savings are and where the overspends are. So obviously, there's quite a big overspend in the planning operations, which is, as you said, has come down considerably since last year. So my question would be, what are we on track? What year are we looking to be on track for those savings to be delivered and us to be operating within the budget? And once those savings are made, the places where we've got savings, for example, I've got the spending freeze on neighbourhood services and grounds, which are things which residents see day to day and probably crop up most when we're seeing feedback on pavement weeds and parks not being mown, things like this. What's the likelihood that they'll reach a point where they'll balance off against each other and we'll see service increases in one area and the being within spending in the other? Does that sort of make sense? I know it's quite a broad question.
Yeah, it does make sense, Chair. Thank you. And I think we're only talking today of Wendy about when we hope to see the savings in planning achieved, and I'm looking to bring those in as soon as possible. Year end would be my absolute preference, but it depends on us being able to bring in the type of candidate that we trust to handle some of the more complex planning applications that we do get in the conurbation. So it's about us being able to recruit in the right level of people to let go of the vacancy staff there, because what I don't want to do is degrade the planning experience and the improvements that Wendy has made. So I think that's the first thing to say. And then on the likelihood of increasing service levels, I think we've got to get ourselves as an entire council to a point where the budget is stabilised, we've achieved the savings, and at that point, it'll be down to Adam and his portfolio holder to look at the spend freeze that we have in place. And I'll certainly be making the case at that point that we'd like to start investing in our assets and repairing our assets.
Great, thank you. Councillor Northover.
Thank you. Just in your presentation, there was a few things that you sort of went before I got them. It's something like F something. What's that?
So that's FSAM. Amanda, do you want to just give a very quick overview on FSAM?
Thank you. So FSAM are the Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Team.
Great, that's all. No, it isn't. No, there was I think something about parking or something overspend, but I didn't quite hear what you said.
Yeah, so I whistled through that because that's the principal driver of the overspend for the overall operations budget. It's not in this panel's oversight, which is why I whistled through it. But we are looking at what we can do there. It's around how we type of account for the charges and how we bring in the revenue there.
Okay, and then just the other one was about lollipop people being replaced with crossings. Have we actually done that?
There is a.
Or we just made them redundant. That's all.
No, there's a proper consulted on process in place that's got a full EQIA etc. behind it.
So we haven't actually done it.
We have done some, yes.
We have.
Yeah.
And we've replaced them with crossings.
Yes.
Okay.
Councillor Hadley.
Yeah, just on that topic, each crossing is safe crossing is assessed on its own merit. So in some cases they've not been replaced with crossings. It depends on the level of traffic and the impact, and whether it's then a zebra crossing or a light control crossing depends. So the safety team spend a lot of time agonising over what is the appropriate measure at that location. So it's not they're not all been replaced with crossings, and it's a 3-year programme, so it is an ongoing piece of work.
Yeah. Okay. I think that was all of them. Thank you.
Councillor Goodall.
Just a quickie. Can you just tell me because it relates to my ward. The relationship between Natural England and with the erosion and the harbour, do they help towards our budget, or do they do anything?
Thank you. So we do get external funding to help support some of the flood risk and erosion elements across the BCP area. A lot of that is held within our capital budgets rather than our revenue, but the team work to then, where we can, make sure we're recharging staff time to that capital code so that we're not seeing an impact on our revenue from external funding delivered work.
Can I just build a little bit further on the SN team? The one that I actually really like the SN team. I think they do a brilliant job, and that team over the last few years has expanded to become really, really specialised and offers their services out on a wider basis. What opportunities are there for them to increase their internal revenue so that the pressure's less from that team, yet we still keep them doing the good work that they're doing around here as well?
Thank you. You're absolutely right. They have been able to benefit from getting in a lot of additional skills within their staff base through the work that they're providing through the shared service offer. We're currently in the process of looking at how that's been delivered and the successes it's brought to see how we can further extend that to be able to support their budget position going forward.
Great, thank you. Councillor Hartley.
Thank you. Yes, on the previous point, it's the Environment Agency, it's the external agency that will get the money from where we can, rather than Natural England. Natural England tend to tell us what we need to do in terms of biodiversity net gain, but it's the Environment Agency that help fund sea defences where homes are at risk. They won't cover it unless there are homes built before. I think it's about 1985 at risk. In terms of the FSERM team, we've been successful in coming up with a partnership with East Devon. So we provide service to East Devon and we get some income for that. And there's work around the southwest. We are looking, to support and we did a survey for South Cornwall, for example, which was just as a single piece of work, but the model where other local authorities buy into using our services is something that we are looking to see whether that's something we can expand. And obviously that depends on those councils wanting to work with us.
Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I suppose it's a question for both teams. So obviously, if we were to, it's because there's been a lot of mention about grant funding and applying for stuff and all the rest of it. So if we move to a model whereby there was this long-term settlement and the money was available in a different way, obviously a lot of this work going forward can just be completely redesigned. Is that something that is under consideration about how that would be developed or not?
So the quick answer to that is a lot of what you're talking about there is fairly unknown. What we know at the moment is the medium-term financial plan that we have to balance and hit, and that's what we're working towards at the moment.
Yeah, Councillor Hadley.
Yeah, so a lot of the grants are capital based. I think you're referring to the new government and what they might do. Until we know, what their intentions are, it's a bit difficult to guess exactly how they might come down. There are elements around devolution and the opportunities that might bring for us to be master of our own destiny, I suppose, in terms of how we spend money that we currently have to spend a lot of time and effort. Actually, the office spend a lot of time responding to grant opportunities, very often at very short notice, only to be told that we weren't successful. So one can hope that we'll be in a better position to be able to build a programme of sustainable work locally based on our priorities. But until government come forward with exactly what those plans are, we can't really predict it. And so I suppose the team can't really come up with an answer.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry, because probably been quite naive here. I'm just trying to work out where. So, like planning forward for attaining these grants, but of course you might not. You can be unsuccessful when you're constantly applying. How do you make allowance for? Is there a success rate we're talking about? Not being completely across how that works.
Do you want to pick that up? Yeah.
If I can answer just on ESM, then perhaps Glyn has got a few seconds to think about that one. I think on ESM, we work very closely with the Environment Agency. They know, we've come up with a 100-year plan for our coast, the Poole Bay coast, and we are in a very advanced state on the Christchurch Bay as well, which goes all the way with New Forest Council to Spit. And so that's saying what we need in a 5-year, 20-year, 50-year, 100-year window. So we know what we'd like, what we need from them. We've tried to give some justification for what we need. That will need some local spend as well, which we haven't yet got. So, we have got a shopping list from ESM, which is very detailed. We have shopping lists, I guess, with transport in terms of our what we'd like from Department of Transport, but that's far more subject perhaps to bids and opportunities that they choose. So things like electric vehicle charging, we managed to get a bid for 150 electrical vehicle charging points in the conurbation, which are going in there imminently. I think the final sort of release of money. That's the other thing, is that we get told, we're indicated that we can have some money, but we don't get told exactly what we've got until some time later. And the controls on that sometimes are quite tight. So I don't know the answer in terms of the percentage of hit rate in terms of our success, but maybe Glyn's got an answer there.
Well, I don't have the percentage, but I think there's a distinction to draw here, and I think what we're talking about principally in this budget are our statutory duties and covering those statutory duties, and that's where we focus the money that we have, and then the grants allow us to do things on top of that, or if we are successful to undertake some of those statutory things, we can then reassign that money to do other statutory things. So it's not a core part of the statutory funding that a success rate type of has an impact on. It's what we can then bring in above that core funding. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Happy with that? Any other hands at the moment? Have we got Kelly? If you can just speak, Kelly, and we see if we can hear you.
Hello.
Great, you are. Okay, you've been getting an easy ride so far, but I've got one question, and I noticed on one of your pie charts which you put up, which was I've lost it now. Third-party payments in one part were up to 44%. What, I just missed it when you were flicking through. What specific, was that on a specific area, or was that across the directorate in general? And if so, what are they? What's the bulk of those made up of?
Thank you. Yeah, you're right with 44%. That is across the whole of housing and communities. So that will be, I briefly mentioned it. That will be things like accommodation that we might be paying for, housing related support, the commissioning that we do in relation to lots and lots of activity around not just housing related support, but community based support too. Some of our domestic abuse outreach work will be within there, as well as then other elements like, of course, things like bed and breakfast costs. Those are quite a substantial amount of that large proportion of the costs that are reflected there, Councillor Rigby.
Thank you. Can I assume that with them being like the B&B cost of accommodation, with the new units that we're taking on for temporary accommodation, that's got the potential to fall? And are there other areas which could potentially come back in-house and reduce the levels of external payments?
There could be some options around some of our commissioning activity around housing related support that could come back in-house, and that is a conversation that we're having at the moment when we're reframing and thinking about what our commissioning strategy will be going forward. But the vast majority is around payments that would be very difficult for us to avoid. They're services that we absolutely need to commission. There may well be a proportion in relation to services coming back in-house, but we do have to, some of these services are very, very specialist. And I think we'd need to think about whether or not the council is the most appropriate and cost effective in delivering some of those. But that is part of the conversation we're having at the moment as we move forward to recommissioning all of our housing related support contracts that provide such a lot of important services.
Yeah, understood. Thanks very much. Councillor Rice.
Yes, so for Glenn and your team, there wasn't very much in the detail, I suppose, about climate response from the council. So I'm just wondering, in terms of, for example, the waste team being able to decarbonise by 2030, if we're only reducing our services to statutory, I'm imagining that you haven't got much budget to be on target with aiming to decarbonise by 2030. So you can correct me on that. But what I would like to see is how much it would cost to be on target to our 2030, so that we know how much money we need from government in order to reach these targets. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I actually understand what you mean. I think from a waste perspective, it might be worth Kate just outlining what we've done already and some of the fleet issues that we have.
Yeah, I can do. In terms of EV fleet, now we have over 60 vehicles that have transitioned to electric. We've got a long way to go. 6 of those are our waste collection vehicles, and they are operating very well. They are very costly. They're double the price of a traditional waste collection vehicle, and their longevity is yet to be tested in terms of value for money going forward. We would have to do that piece of work. We don't have it as a service. We are now focused on the simpler recycling reforms and rolling out. Sorry, my voice is going. In a colder week, we are focused on the simpler recycling reforms, the return deposit schemes, the extended producer responsibility schemes that are coming forward, and so there's various opportunities to look at ways to decarbonise and reduce our impact through those, but it is a long piece of work, and 2030 is not very far away, so it will need considerable funding to achieve that.
So when do you think that we would be given as a council figures for sort of the costing of that? Because we can't lobby the government unless we have numbers.
Yeah, it's very difficult at the moment because we are still waiting for government to give us firm implementation timescales for some of these pieces of work. So that's why we haven't yet been able to come forward in terms of a BCP waste strategy to do that piece of work. So we are still waiting for various consultation pieces to conclude for us to have a firm understanding of what is expected and then how we're being asked to deliver that to inform the costings of doing that. So at the moment, I can't give you a definitive.
Like a year, 3 years?
I would hope within a year, 18 months, but it's been a long, slow process to date.
So I'm just wondering if there's an easier way to, like, because it's not just waste that needs to decarbonise, it's the whole sector, which I imagine will cause a cost pressure, which is not included here anywhere. So it doesn't suggest that we're prioritising the climate emergency because we're not including it within our budgets. So even something basic, or even a sentence saying this doesn't include the cost pressures for aiming, you know, like so that it's still acknowledged as
Yeah, we can certainly add that. Thank you.
Councillor Northover.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Kelly about, this isn't related to, yeah. I wanted to understand more about how our temporary housing that we've got, how, and it might mean that this is more for a working group because I think it's the sort of long thing, but I sort of wondered how, like, are they all full up, and then is there what's the through flow like, and
yeah,
and how, you know, where do people go afterwards, and
Yeah.
also, you know, how the through of people go through bed and breakfast, how it, you know, how long people are staying and how they're moving between the different types of accommodation that
Yeah.
and then also how once somebody's in our temporary accommodation, which might be quite good compared to other people who are in poor accommodation elsewhere, and how they are prioritised against each other.
Thank you, Councillor Northover.
Yeah.
Lots there, and I would suggest that's exactly the sort of detail we might want to get into in a working group. But just to pick out some of the points, so people will typically move from some people move from bed and breakfast into permanent social housing. It very much depends on need and priority and what sort of accommodation they require. We are seeing the amount of time that people are staying in bed and breakfast reduce as a result of the work that we've been doing, both in terms of prevention and also moving people on more quickly. People will sometimes move from bed and breakfast, or we might even just relieve homelessness through placement into the private rented sector, which is where things like rent deposit loans come in. But we do have an extensive portfolio of temporary accommodation, which is, you know, the intention is that is short term, and that people then are able to move through the system and ideally into social or affordable housing options. Some people do move off into the private rented sector. It's a mixture of different kind of exit routes from that. But I don't think that we at this point have a very clear strategy in terms of how long we want people to be in temporary accommodation. I think they tend to be there for longer than we would anticipate and we would ideally like. So I think that's why one of the reasons that we need to really focus on temporary accommodation over the next year in terms of what our requirements are going forward. I think Gillian might want to come in as well.
Yeah, it was just to draw out a connection. I think that this area of Kelly's budget probably has the most in common with the rest of the wellbeing budget, or the biggest chunk of the wellbeing budget, which of course is adult social care and the costs of care, because they're both demand-led budgets which are about addressing need, and that means that our management of them has to be done in particular ways. So the forecasting of them through a year can be quite challenging to get right, and quite volatile and variable. We can, of course, drive down costs, and you know, the third party provider element of that is important too. But mostly it's about how we have a wider strategy to kind of address the demand. And particularly to kind of do that over time. So I think it could be an area that benefits from some scrutiny through a working group, because it isn't just about the finances, it's about those choices and options that we have to try to address the demand, and also ultimately to ensure that people are in the best possible accommodation that they can be at the right time, and that's available to them, because that's the ultimate goal. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy with that answer, Councillor Northover? Sound. I want to try and wrap this up in the next 5 minutes or so on this item, so we're not sat here all night. So I've got Councillor Dalton-Gibson wanting to speak. Is there anyone else after that, or should we make your question the last one?
Thank you. Kelly, you mentioned about 700 temporary accommodation homes. Can you give us an idea of what is that? I mean, obviously the bed and breakfast is temporary, but they move out of bed and breakfast into temporary. So in sort of common language, both of those would be temporary. I wondered if you could just explain what the 700 are, or group them roughly.
Yeah, thank you. So the bed and breakfast we would class as emergency accommodation, and temporary accommodation will be a mixture of, I mean, this is one of the interesting things. There are a number of different models that we've kind of gathered over the years, and what's needed, I think, is to really review whether those models are appropriate. There are some leased properties that we might we lease from housing associations. You know, schemes that we did many years ago that are still in situ, but the vast majority of the 700, there are some hostels, There are some accommodation that is providing sort of specific accommodation for single people, specific accommodation for families, but the vast majority of it is self-contained accommodation that is rented through our Seascape Homes and Property portfolio, where they are rents that are let at properties that are let at 80% of market value, so they're a bit more affordable than the private rented sector. They're of good standard, and they and people ultimately don't have the same insecurity that they do in the private rented sector. But that does cause that problem then in terms of people staying for a very long time, and become sort of, you know, the notion of whether or not they are actually temporary accommodation or whether or not people have been there for a very, very long time is one that we need to explore. And I know of one case that has been in temporary accommodation due to the sort of specific need that they have for many, many, many years. Others move on very quickly. So it is a mix, but the vast majority is property that is purchased, or acquisitions that are purchased off the open market, and then let through our Seascape Homes and Property Management.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Last chance of asking before I close this item. Councillor Northover just getting in at the end there.
Well, could we, how do we go about doing a working group on that subject?
Welcome to the next item. Yeah, so we're on that, and a good transition question. Thank you, Glyn, Kelly, and your teams as well for coming in and giving those presentations. They're really useful, and I'm pretty sure that should we, well, I get a feeling we are going to form a working group. We'll be in very close contact over the next few months while we're going through that. So item number 8 for us is the working group budget. Budget scope and report. And I'm just going to ask Lindsay if you can do a little introduction on this for us, please, before we open up to the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to set out the sort of requirements of setting up a working group in line with the Constitution and what this working group would entail for you. So this is, as I said earlier, an opportunity to establish one on budget, and taking into account what you've just heard in the presentations, and also any ideas or thoughts that you had yourselves already, to isolate any specific budget areas that you think warrant a sort of deep dive look at. And this is not, this working group would not be about being a finance expert. So just to really stress that, it's much more about testing and challenging the policy behind the budget decision, so that you can help contribute to the developing budget that will be set for 25-26. So in terms of this working group, you're being asked in the recommendations to agree whether you're going to set one up, and then the membership, the lead member and the lead officer for the working group, the key lines of inquiry and the measures of effectiveness. So we'd be looking to see who would want to volunteer for the working group. We would be looking to establish a lead member here today so that we can move forward with arrangements. And depending on what areas you decide warrant scrutiny, we'd be looking to establish who the lead officer would be. And that would be one of the budget holders for the areas that you want to scrutinise. The key lines of inquiry is really important. This working group is one of a set of 4 working groups that are being offered to all the ONS committees concurrently, so that you can all have an opportunity to engage in the developing budget at a timely point when it is still developing. So there can be really a maximum of 2 meetings of the working group. It's very much a short, sharp look at some very limited areas. I would suggest less is more, that you shouldn't feel like you need to look at lots of different areas, but really pick out those ones that jump out to you as critical areas from what you've heard. And we'd be looking to hold those working group meetings as soon as possible, but completed by the end of October. They've been non-public meetings that are held either on Teams, daytime or evening, however that works for that membership and those officers involved, reporting findings into the ONS board meeting in November. So the transparency comes through with the reporting mechanism for all the working groups. So I'll leave it there. If you've got any other questions on actually establishing the working group, do let me know. But yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Lindsay. I've got one question just from what you did. Sorry to jump in. I get picking the committee members and the lead member. You also mentioned a lead officer. How do we go about that? Do we just pick someone, or is it like, is there a strategic way of looking at it?
Yes, I'll get my lucky dip hat out for you. No, I think if you, for example, if you're going to focus in on housing and bed and breakfast, it would probably be more in Kelly's area. If you're going to look at something more environmental, then it would probably be another officer that would be relevant. So very much the budget holder, I think, needs to be the relevant person, and they would also be able to tell you who else should attend to be able to give you a full picture of whatever you want to scrutinise.
Okay, great. Any questions or discussion on this item, or volunteers more pertinently?
Can I just ask, you said it was limited, what could be done on the working group? If separating planning and transport, would that be something, or? Because at the moment, that seems two things that are, it was in the budget which didn't seem to sit well together. Is that something that could be looked at, or is that not in the scope?
I would suggest that you want to focus in on budget areas that currently sit within the scope of your committee. Actually, I am going to come on to that in a later item on the agenda, but at the moment you have planning within the remit of your committee. You have highways maintenance, but then transport does sit in the ONS board. So
it just seemed it was two very different things to be budgeted together into one budget.
yeah.
Not a big deal, but you know,
I think you can put anything in the pot, and it might be that we need to go away a little bit and see whether what value you're going to add by looking at certain areas, if there are suggestions.
Yeah. Okay, anyone else? Councillor Rice.
Well, just on that point, I assume it was put together because the directorate covers those two areas.
Yeah.
In other councils, they would be in different departments and they would be covered by a different director, but that's why it's lumped together.
Anyone else? Councillor Northover.
Well, I'm interested in looking at housing, bed and breakfast, temporary housing.
So if you go down to page 35 in our report, you'll see there's been a couple of suggestions from officers of areas which we might want to look at for each of the committees. And for our one, there's two areas of focus which have been highlighted, which is bed and breakfast costs and climate and ecological emergency budget. Almost like the officers know our committees and what we're interested in. I like the look of both of those areas. One thing that Councillor Rice, you said before, that I think is really interesting and probably quite difficult to find is what is the budget for actually transitioning to net zero, which we have to do in 6 years' time, which I feel is something which is continuously overlooked and maybe gets a little bit of, we'll stick a few £100 here or a little bit here without actually looking at the overall costs and how we can possibly even access money in that area. So that may be of something of interest as well. So I'm totally open, and equally I'm open to any of the members sitting on and leading this working group as well, if you want to. I've also been told, and I think it says in the report, that we can recruit. We're not limited to just committee members on this, but I would think that it's probably best to keep this group to 3 or 4 as a maximum to really get to grips to it. It'd be really nice to see it cross-party as well, if that's at all possible. So if anyone's got an expression of interest, Councillor Northover, you seem like you did, which is great. Councillor Martin, Councillor Rice. Anyone else? I think we could probably manage with that.
I was only putting myself forward for the climate working group.
There'll be one single working group looking at both items. So if you want to be, oh, we can choose to do one item, we can choose to do two items, we can do what we want with the group. But if you're in the group, it will be needing your work on all of the items that the group chooses to do, and we choose for the group to do as a committee.
Okay.
Clear? Cool. But that's up for us to decide. So my instinct at the moment would be to go with the recommendations in the paper, which officers have suggested, mostly because they would like us to look at this, and therefore I think they'd be most helpful on those areas as well, if that's where they want to focus and feel like we can add value. Hopefully we've, over the last couple of years, 18 months, established that we do add value from here. So if that's where they want us to look, I'm happy to be guided by them, unless anyone's got any other items from our areas, which we look at under portfolio areas, which are on page 41. If anyone wants to have a look and see if there's anything there which really sticks out to them as being of particular interest, or they feel isn't getting a fair look in when we've been talking. I'll give you a moment just to read it. If nothing's coming forward, I would be happy to propose from the chair's seat that we form a working group, and that working group focuses on two items, which is the bed and breakfast costs and the climate and ecological emergency budget as laid out in this paper. And I'll look for someone to second that. Oh, Councillor Hadley.
Sorry, I appreciate I'm not a member of this committee, and but I think that the point that Councillor Northover made about that the journey, and so not just about bed and breakfast costs, it's about temporary accommodation and how long people are going through, and that whole journey, I think was a really good concept. Not that that's in my area at all. And on the climate, I think actually, you know, how do we budget for getting to net zero by 2030 in terms of the medium-term financial plan and the slightly longer-term plan. Revenue and capital, not just the budget for next year, is slightly wider than as written there and as you're just suggesting adopt. So I don't know whether you wanted to say that wider view, but that's up to you.
I'm happy to widen that out, and I'm also happy for the working group to go down the route it wants with them. I don't want to direct it so much from here after we form it and decide what the key lines of inquiry are and how it is. And we also want to put in how we measure the effectiveness of the working group as well, and sort of agree a method on how we'll see if they achieve what they set out to do. But if we want to broaden that scope a little bit and put words in it, Councillor Rice, please stop me speaking.
Well, I was just wondering how much work the officers have put into the first meeting. That's the issue. If they need a bit of a broader a bit more of a accurate remit as to what we actually want to focus on, then they can bring more information to the first meeting, which is going to be useful, I would have thought.
I'd be inclined to agree with that. Oh, Gillian.
Yeah, just to that point on how officers can best prepare to support the working group, and Kelly can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I suspect on the topic around B&B, temporary accommodation, that kind of pathway, if you like, we will be doing, you know, some quite significant work as part of the budget planning process. So it will be about showing the workings to the working group, and you know, some of that will be work that we'll have at the ready. It sounds from the earlier conversation, although I'm now talking beyond my area of brief, that broader question about climate costing is a sort of cross-cutting one, and more complex. So in terms of sort of officer contributions to it, so some shaping of that from the working group will be really, really helpful for the right data, apart from anything else to be pulled forward.
Thanks, Julian. That's really useful. Anyone got anything they want to add? So are people happy to broaden that scope a little bit as we've just talked through, and then allow the working group itself to refine if it finds a more narrow path as they're going through this with the officers in that first meeting? Okay, I'll take that as agreement. What else do I need to do? Membership. Yes, Councillor Rice.
Can I just get clarification then of what you've understood as to for the climate budget aspect?
I have understood that it is about the budget that's associated with transitioning the council to net zero, that is the wider element that you would like to look at. I would say that these working groups, I can't stress enough that the more targeted they can be, the more effective they'll be, because often with working groups, we might sort of add on an extra meeting or keep going. If you move beyond the window in which you can contribute to the developing budget, you will have moved beyond the ability to have influence in that. And that is the very purpose of the working group. So it may be that coming out of this very targeted working group, you establish that there is further work you would like to do as a committee in some other form, perhaps another working group. I would perhaps bear that sort of approach in mind rather than aiming to achieve everything within this working group. That's just sort of a word of caution, I would say. But yes, I've captured that you want to look at that wider picture of the costs that are required to move the council.
Yeah, some of the overspend projections. Cool.
Sorry.
Overspend projections.
Overspend projections.
I think that's like in the SEND budget, like huge overspend costs.
Councillor Dongers.
But Lindsay, would it be fair to say that we also really want to, when we're looking at the climate and ecological emergency budget, focus it on the remit of this committee, not actually the whole council, which just strikes me as way too big?
Yes, I would agree that as far as possible, it would be good to focus on the remit of the committee. However, many areas of the work in the council span across different committees, and I think if we try to be too prescriptive, we can find ourselves not really scrutinising effectively because of the cross-cutting nature of certain things. So this is the first time that we have done this process. So I would say I think there needs to be an element of we see how it works, and if in time we say no, we need to be much more targeted next time, that will be a learning point. But I would say if it's impossible to scrutinise something effectively by saying no, we'll only keep within the narrow remit of the committee, then that wouldn't really be a good use of scrutiny's time.
Thank you. Councillor Clements, did you indicate earlier? Okay, sorry, I thought I saw your hand go up earlier. Councillor Rice.
Yeah, just in terms of reassurance, like there's always different amounts of work that can be done on that. But what I had in mind was, for example, the example with Glyn in terms of just in the budgets, simply stating we haven't included this, then that could be rolled out across the whole council. And that's what I want, is rolled out across the whole council. But I'm hoping that we can go a bit more than just one sentence. Yeah.
Lindsay.
Sorry, I just thought something that might assist. It's really helpful to have those two key areas that you want to focus in on, but perhaps what we could do is in quite a short time frame after this meeting is supply you with a key lines of inquiry document. Hopefully you're familiar with that. We've started to send them out to you when you have established a scrutiny topic that you want to look at. That really asks you to set out what your questions are that you want to answer through your scrutiny. So as a committee, you can all contribute to that informally. Perhaps you could delegate authority to the lead member of the working group that you're going to need to establish tonight who that lead member will be. You could delegate authority to that lead member to sign off the key lines of inquiry, and that will help just to really shape the areas you want to look into and really set out your sort of data and information requests to officers so that they can come fully prepared to support you in those working groups as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that's quite a lot, and not to predetermine how the working group might go, but it sounds with the broad scope of the climate and ecological emergency budget transition to net zero element might end up being this is a huge piece of work that no one's ever looked at, and that might be let's look at it. That could be the result of that element, but without looking at it, we don't know. The bed and breakfast and transition through the temporary accommodation area could be a lot more nuanced into the upcoming budget and the close medium-term financial plan as well. So I think there's two types of item on there as well, which I think is good for this first time as well to see how it works with two different ones and two different directorate. Well, one's a very specific directorate, one is kind of a little bit of everything. So are we happy to set that that'll be the areas which the working group focuses on? Agreed? Excellent. Membership. So I've got Councillor Northover, Martin and Rice. Is everyone happy for it to be a 3-member group from this committee? And for those that membership? Agreed? Excellent. Next will be the lead member. No one's looking too enthusiastic about that part of it. So just for clarity, Lindsay, could you just run through again what the lead member will be responsible for?
Yeah, I think the lead member should expect to be the key person that we will liaise with in terms of establishing dates to make sure that this gets moving. Some sort of informal chairing responsibilities. These won't be incredibly formal meetings with lots of people, but some chairing of the meetings. And then the reporting back, as I mentioned earlier, will go into the November ONS board. So I would think that there's a fair expectation on lead members to come to that ONS board meeting to be able to outline findings of the working group. And that will happen for all the 4 committees who will all feed into that ONS board meeting.
Thank you. So I'll go back to my original question.
Will there be an officer writing a summary of each meeting? Or will the member need to take notes themselves?
We are lucky now that we have Teams-based meetings. We will probably record the meetings and put them, draw up some sort of brief notes. There isn't an expectation that this will be a really heavy sort of output in terms of what's going through and coming out of them in terms of notes or minutes. There isn't an expectation on councillors to write notes. It's much more about giving the opportunity for members to understand and input into the budget so that that can come through in that ONS board debate in November. So not a huge output on behalf of councillors.
On want of repeating myself again, was that an offer, Councillor Martin?
Yeah, just because I'm looking at the time as well.
Thank you.
I think it could be a standoff all night. There could be a standoff all night here. So,
second are we happy to take that by agreement? Excellent. Okay. The last thing I've got is measuring the effectiveness of the working group, but I don't think we need to necessarily do too much with that, do we, Lindsay?
No, I'm just going to say, actually, if I could just go back to say a lead officer for the group, it probably will be appropriate perhaps to have a joint double act with Kelly and also Isla Reynolds, who I think will sit in that. Yeah, I'm getting nods from other officers, so that's good. So we'll work with both the officers in establishing that. We've got your key lines for inquiry at B and at C, really, unless you want to change the measures of effectiveness that have been broadly set out in the report, we'll take those as confirmed by the committee, if you're happy with that. They are quite broad measures of effectiveness.
I'm very happy with that, unless anyone's got any objection. Take those agreed. Okay, excellent. I think we've got our first working group there. Thank you to everyone for helping with that, and I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes as well. I think it's really interesting and a really great opportunity to get an early eye in the budget and see what's going on for us all to understand that as well. So I'll move on to the final item, which is the Overview and Scrutiny Annual Report, which we get every year. So Lindsay, can you take us through that, please?
Thank you. I'm going to keep this really brief, both because of the time, but also the process around the annual report is that it has to go to all the 4 ONS committees. However, it goes on to council, and I would suggest that there is a fuller debate at the ONS board around this, and any member can go to that ONS board and also maybe feed any comments into the chair who may want to represent them to the ONS board, or a chair's representative. So please don't feel like you need to debate this. We'll go through this in full detail here. I would just highlight to you that there is a recommendation at item 2 that committees comment on some revisions to the overview and scrutiny structure. So just to explain the context, if there were to be big revisions to the overview and scrutiny committee structure, those would go through a more full process, probably through audit and governance committee. However, there is a facility within the report, the annual report on overview and scrutiny, to suggest any minor changes that are required. And in this case, at figure 1B within the report, there are some minor changes suggested in red text, and they do relate to this committee. The changes suggested are because the cabinet portfolios have changed. Since the leadership of the council has changed, there's been an additional portfolio put in place, and all the overview and scrutiny committees align to the cabinet portfolios. So no major changes have happened in terms of the remit that each committee will look at, other than those few items in red text. So it is about bringing all of the planning scrutiny responsibilities under this committee, so including the local plan, likewise bringing in local transport plan and strategic transport and Western Gateway into the responsibilities of this committee, both areas that were previously under the ONS board, and road safety to come under this committee as well. They're all areas that are a bit of a toss-up about whether they go to ONS board or this committee, but because they now sit very clearly within those portfolios, it's about trying to keep the portfolios as much together under each ONS committee as possible. So I hope that element makes sense. So if you have any comments that you want to make on that as a committee here, given that it affects your committee, please do make those comments tonight. And it will actually be council that determines that structure when this report goes through. In terms of the remainder of the report, I would just say to you that it's something that the purpose of the report is to outline activity in the ONS area, but also for me as statutory scrutiny officer to recommend any changes or improvements to make sure that scrutiny remains fit for purpose. However, although it's my report, scrutiny is a member-led function. One of the key principles in the Constitution is that it's member-led, and that members seek to continuously improve through self-reflection and development. So really, I would say that this report is a tool for you to do that. So I've done some analysis within the report, particularly from paragraph 16 onwards. There's a reflection on sort of the outputs, the breakdown of work that's been done by committees. I would say that this is something for you to reflect on, and also to bear in mind when you go through your next round of annual work programming. I'm more than happy to explain some of the detail of it or answer any questions, but I would say I'm also very happy to save that debate and discussion for ONS board if you would like that. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I'm conscious that I think last year as well we got this first, so at least you're fresh to it and you're not sick of looking at it at this point. But thanks again for doing it. It's a really, really detailed report. The thing that stood out to me is we've got the lowest average number of agenda items across all of the committees, including corporate, well, excluding corporate and community, which doesn't exist anymore. So maybe we need to up our agenda slightly. For me, I think the main thing is the changes on the responsibility. So the bit on 1B, which you said, which I've looked through, and I think it makes perfect sense for those areas to come over to us. I can't see any issue with it. I think it fits in perfectly within place each of those that are coming through. I don't know what the rest of the committee feels like that, because I think everyone's aware I'd get my hands on any areas where we can scrutinise really. Yeah, Councillor Ricketts.
Yeah, it just makes perfect sense. I mean, we need to align with the new portfolios, and I don't have any problem with it at all. I just think it's sensible.
Yeah, I'm seeing general nods all around. Yeah, so we're happy for that to be a recommendation from us, that that stays as outlined in the proposed structure committee. We support it as a committee. Unanimous? Yeah. Yes, Councillor Rice. Microphone, please.
The local plan, I was noticing how that was previously in the overview and scrutiny board and how it's such a huge piece of work, I suppose, but they had more meetings. We're keeping the number of meetings the same, but we're just increasing our workload. Is that like our responsibilities? So I was just wondering whether we should be taking one of their meetings or something like that, or maybe we don't want more meetings.
I mean, we're taking their areas of responsibility. I don't know if we'll get away with stealing the meetings as well. But I think with where we are at the local plan at the moment, we spoke about this in the chairs meeting, that with a lot of the work and areas having been done and the bulk of it before it went out to review being done, that once the local plan is adopted, it sits better with us. And that doesn't mean to say that areas of the local plan still won't get pulled back in if it refers back to ONS board's work and what they've been doing, or if any really drastic changes are needed when it comes back to us. I think we can probably take a view on where that needs to be, if it's with the board, which meets much more often and can be more reactive to it, or whether it's us.
But we've got transport as well, which is another huge thing that is coming through.
Too much work for us. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you. Just a point to note that the local transport plan, there is a cross-party working group that do a lot of work on that. So some of that work will hopefully be done for you, and your opportunity might be to scrutinise the outputs.
Great, thank you. Any more discussion or comment on that, Lindsay?
I just wanted to pick up on your comment around the low agenda numbers for the committee, just to say that actually that's a positive thing. And I hope that the committee do take that in that way. Less is more with scrutiny. And as you'll be aware from the journey of scrutiny since the inception of BCP, some of the meetings were very lengthy. And that was something that had been commented on in best value work that was done with the council. So actually working really hard to reduce the number of agenda items is something that we have put a lot of effort into. And I think the committee should really reflect positively on that. And you can just see how much time has been spent on the agenda items tonight, and we're still going, and that's 2 substantive items. So do think of it that way.
Okay, great. In that case, we're top of the leaderboard. Well done, everyone. Any more comments on that? So we're happy to give that as our recommendation, that we take it as it is in the new proposed structure, if that's great. Good for you to take away. Okay, great, thank you. Which moves us on to the final item, which is the work plan. And Lindsay, to you again, please, if I can.
Thank you. The work plan is as set out at Appendix B to the work plan report. And I will come on to that, but you do have a scrutiny request to consider tonight. This is at Appendix F to the report. It came in from Councillor Richard Herrett, just as he was leaving in his position as the previous Vice Chair, and is a request relating to data retention and the climate impact of that. So as you'll be familiar, I think by now, if you receive a scrutiny request, it is for you as a committee to determine whether you want to add it to your forward plan or not. It's not to do the scrutiny at this stage. I've done a little bit of digging with officers to understand where the council is at with this issue. And from what I understand, we obviously have been doing a lot of transformation work. This is another stage that the council will be looking to come on to in the not too distant future. I don't believe that there's anything that officers could bring you immediately on this, but it may be suitable to timetable something a bit like the paper you had earlier, a discussion paper around this, because this is about an issue that is not yet determined by the council, doesn't yet have a clear strategy or anything in place. So it would be suitable for you as a committee to try and input into that. So that's just to give you a little bit of background as to how you might want to approach this item.
Thank you, Councillor Ricketts, and then Councillor Dalton Gibson.
Thank you. Are there not statutory requirements on data retention within some areas? I mean, there are. Well, I know that there are. Having worked in this field, so some of it's already prescribed anyway, and we can't get away from that because it's written in law. So, not quite sure what direction this is coming from, because surely our data retention complies with the legislation for the various elements that we retain our data.
I'm definitely not the expert to answer on the detail. However, I think what the nature of this scrutiny request is getting at is very much looking at the climate impact of those data retention policies. So I do believe that there is a work stream coming on that would obviously look at those policies again and see what they are within the council, but also take account of that climate impact around data retention, or indeed if those policies are to be looked at again, which I understand they are, by establishing this as a piece of work, the committee could ask that be a consideration of those policies. I don't, in short, I don't think that it's all set out by statute and there's no room for manoeuvre. That's not the message I've had from officers.
Thank you. So the first real date I can see if we wanted to add this in would be the 14th of May meeting, which is quite a way away. My suggestion might be to understand what you've just said there, Councillor Ricketts, that none of us are experts in this in the room, that we might want to take that just and get a briefing first of all on actually what's the current situation like, and have it on one of our alternative dates where we can have somewhat, I don't know, some IT team, maybe someone, I don't know, I'll be making it up, but we ask for some guidance on what's in place, what the statutory requirements are, what we're doing, and then we can formulate from there how we want that to then come to a formal scrutiny meeting, or if we do. Does that sound like a reasonable way to go with that? Cool. Are you happy with that? So our work plan is looking pretty busy for the next meetings in November and February. They're all pretty full up. So unless anyone has anything pressing that they'd like to see come forward in May, or they feel needs to be reactively looked at before any of this stuff, I'm happy to leave that for now unless any suggestions come in. Councillor Rice.
I was just wondering about the transport aspects that would have been on the working plan for ONS, whether they've been moved across, if there are any. I seem to remember raising ones on road safety. See.
Obviously, if the remit of this committee does change, that won't go through council until October. At that point, we would look at anything that has already been set up on the work plan of the Overview and Scrutiny Board, and look to bring that across into this work plan. But this committee, if it takes on those additional responsibilities, would have every right to then ask to scrutinise things, even if that wasn't already set up on the ONS board. We just want to make sure that there's a clear understanding of any thought process that has gone in already in the ONS board if those suggestions have already been made.
So what I
won't be lost.
Yeah, exactly. So you'll automatically bring it across, and then we as a committee will decide whether we want to continue it or not.
Yeah, and we have got in the February meeting, we've got a reserve space for pre-decision or reactive scrutiny. So that could be used. And I believe We've also got scope to call an additional meeting for the one that we missed during the pre-election period. Okay, I know, well, and I guess we can hopefully squeeze it in somewhere if we need to. not to put any more work on you. Cool. Any more comments on the work plan? Obviously notwithstanding anything, just forward to myself and David and Lindsay, and we can look to get it on there. Okay, so all that's, oh, Lindsay. So
last point, I promise. The Overview and Scrutiny Board received a very detailed item on corporate plan monitoring at their last meeting. There's a new system, an interactive sort of dashboard in place now. There's a new corporate plan, as you know. So I think it would be very appropriate, and there was a recommendation coming out of ONS Board, that the monitoring of the relevant indicators for each ONS committee is something that gets sort of brought within the work plan of each ONS committee. There's by no means an expectation that you get a suite of data at every meeting, but that's something that I'd like to bring forward to you at some point. And I know that the portfolio holder also suggested that there could be some input from this committee into the sort of dashboard to monitor climate work. So I'm just saying that at some point it'd be good to have a briefing, perhaps bringing all of those sort of data monitoring elements together, because that will form part of your horizon scanning role, so you know where to direct your work.
that sounds good. The more data, the better, right? Okay, everyone happy? I'll do a better look around the table this time. Okay, in that case, all that's left for me to say is the date of our next meeting, which is 6 o'clock, Wednesday, the 20th of November. Thank you very much to everyone for coming, everyone watching online, all the members of the public who came in before, all the officers who have given us presentations, and that's it. Thanks very much. Good night.